Hello, everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. Okay, so I've never posted anything like this before, but I can't keep it to myself anymore. I need to get this out there, and this seems like the only place where people might actually believe me. My name's Josh, and this happened a couple of years ago during winter break. I still get chills thinking about it, and my hands are actually shaking a little right now, just typing this out. It was supposed to be this fun, relaxing trip. My buddy, I'll just call him Mark, since he'd kill me if I used his real name online, invited me and his girlfriend Sarah up to his family's place near Lake Tahoe on the California side. It's this gorgeous cabin-style house tucked back in the woods, not totally isolated, but you definitely feel away from everything, the kind of place where the silence at night is so complete it almost has a weight to it. We'd been there a couple of days just hanging out, and the plan for that day was to take the snowmobiles out. They had two old but reliable machines, and we were going to hit some of the scenic trails that cut through the national forest land behind their property. The morning was perfect, bitterly cold, the kind that makes your nostrils stick together when you breathe in, but crystal clear. The sky was this hard, brilliant blue, and the sun reflecting off the snow was so bright it hurt to look at for too long. We geared up in the garage, thick overalls, helmets, gloves. I remember the smell in there, a mix of gasoline, old wood, and damp wool. Mark led the way with Sarah on the back of his machine, and I followed. The roar of the engines was deafening, a constant vibrating buzz that settled deep in my chest. We followed a trail that climbed steadily upward, weaving through massive pine trees so laden with snow they looked like they were wearing thick white coats. The world was reduced to three colors: the green of the pines, the blinding white of the snow, and the blue of the sky. It was beautiful, but in a stark, almost severe way. After maybe 45 minutes of riding, we came to a lookout point Mark knew about. It was a small, flattened area at the top of a ridge, offering this insane, panoramic view of the lake and the surrounding mountains. We cut the engines, and the sudden silence was jarring. It felt like someone had suddenly turned off the world. All you could hear was the faint creak of the snow under our boots and the wind whispering through the tops of the pines. We were just standing there, taking it in, breathing clouds of steam into the air. I was messing with my phone, trying to get a picture, but the cold was already killing the battery. Sarah was the one who saw it first. She was standing a few feet away from us, pointing down the slope into the tree line below the ridge. "Hey," she said, her voice quiet, a little uncertain. "What is that?" Mark and I followed her gaze. At first, I didn't see anything. Just trees and shadow and snow. Then I saw it. A movement. Something had ducked behind a thick pine tree about 100 yards down the slope. It was fast. "Probably a deer," Mark said, already turning back to the view. He's always been the pragmatic one, never one for an overactive imagination. "No," Sarah insisted, her voice tighter now. "It wasn't a deer. It had a weird face. It was peeking out from behind the tree." I squinted, trying to see past the sun's glare on the snow. The area where she was looking was a patch of deep shadow cast by a cluster of firs. For a second, nothing. Then I saw it again. A pale shape, roundish, emerged from behind the trunk for just a second before disappearing again. It was too high up to be a deer on all fours. It was at a height where if it were a person, they'd be standing. A cold knot started to form in my stomach, something deeper than just the winter chill. Mark laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "Babe, it's a tree stump. Your eyes are playing tricks on you with the shadows." But it wasn't a stump. Stumps don't move, and they don't have faces. That's when it stepped out. It didn't emerge slowly or dramatically. 1 second there was nothing but shadow. The next, it was just there, standing fully in the open, maybe 80 yards away now. It was huge. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing made me feel small. It had to be 7.5 feet tall, and built like a powerlifter, covered in shaggy black hair that was matted in places with snow. My brain short-circuited. It tried to file it under bear, but it was all wrong. It was standing on 2 legs. For one thing, its posture slumped but upright. And the face, oh God, the face. It wasn't a bear's snout. It was a cream-colored, almost leathery-looking face, hairless with a broad, flat nose. And its eyes, they were wide and black like 2 pools of oil, and they were fixed right on us. It didn't look human, but it didn't look like any ape I'd ever seen in a zoo either. It was something else, something in between. And under its chin was a distinct, stark white patch of hair, like a goatee made of snow. It opened its mouth and let out this sound. It wasn't a roar, it was a hiss, a low, guttural, angry hiss that cut through the quiet air and seemed to vibrate in my teeth. It was a sound of pure threat. Time, which had felt frozen, suddenly snapped back into hyperspeed. "Get on the fucking sleds, now!" Mark screamed, and the sheer panic in his voice was more terrifying than the thing itself. We scrambled. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would burst. My gloves felt clumsy and thick as I fumbled for the starter on my snowmobile. I glanced back. The thing was still standing there, hissing, its dark eyes locked on us. Then it took a step forward, then another. It moved with a strange, fluid grace for something so massive, its arms swinging at its sides. My engine coughed to life. Mark's was already roaring. Sarah was on the back, clinging to him, her face a mask of pure terror. I didn't even have my helmet properly strapped. I just yanked it on and gunned the throttle. We shot out of that lookout point, kicking up a huge plume of snow. I was right behind Mark, the trees becoming a blur on either side of the trail. The wind whipped at my jacket, and the cold air burned my lungs. All I could think was, go, go, go. That's when I made the mistake of looking back over my shoulder. It wasn't just one. There were more of them. At least 3 others, maybe 4, bursting from the tree line onto the trail behind us, and they weren't running on 2 legs. They dropped onto all 4s, and they were fast, unbelievably, horrifyingly fast. They moved like enormous, powerful dogs, their limbs pistoning, kicking up great arcs of snow behind them. Their speed was all wrong for their size. It was unnatural. And the sounds started, not hisses anymore. These were loud, chattering hoots and hollers, like monkeys but deeper, more guttural. They echoed through the woods, a chaotic hunting chorus. It was the most terrifying sound I have ever heard. We were flying down the trail, but they were gaining. I could see them in my peripheral vision, dark shapes closing the distance. The trail dipped and we hit a straightaway, our speedometers pushing as high as we dared on the packed snow. I risked another glance back. One of them, slightly ahead of the others, scooped up a rock from the ground without breaking its stride. Its motion was effortless. It stood up on its hind legs for just a second, its body coiling, and then it threw the rock. I heard it whistle past my ear. It was so close I felt the displacement of air. A fraction of a second later, there was a sickening thud, and Sarah screamed, a sharp, agonized sound that was almost ripped away by the wind. The rock had hit her square in the back. Mark shouted something I couldn't hear, but I saw him look back, his body tensing. I ducked my head low, pressing myself against the handlebars, making myself as small a target as possible. My whole world narrowed to the strip of trail in front of me and the terrifying knowledge that more rocks were coming. I was waiting for the impact, for the searing pain in my own back or head. Every shadow, every branch that snapped made me flinch. I don't know how long the chase lasted. It felt like an eternity, but it was probably only a couple of minutes. The hooting and hollering began to fade, becoming more distant. I dared another look. The creatures had fallen back. though I could still see their dark forms moving through the trees parallel to the trail. They were still following, but we were finally outpacing them. We didn't let up. We rode flat out until we burst out of the forest and onto the plowed road that led to the house. We didn't slow down until we were in the driveway, skidding to a halt right by the front door. We killed the engines, and again, the silence was a physical shock. For a moment, none of us moved. We just sat there breathing in ragged, sobbing gasps. The adrenaline was so intense I was trembling uncontrollably. My legs felt like jelly when I finally climbed off the snowmobile. Sarah was crying, clutching her back where the rock had hit. Mark was at her side, his face pale, his hands shaking as he helped her off. We stumbled into the house, locking the door behind us and collapsing onto the floor in the entryway. We just sat there in a heap for a long time, not speaking, just trying to process what had just happened. It was only later, when I was taking my gear off in the garage, that I noticed it. On the shoulder of my black jacket, there was a smear of something. It was a yellowish, sticky goo. It wasn't snow, and it wasn't mud. I leaned in to look and immediately recoiled. The smell was foul. It's hard to describe, like rotten meat and old, wet fur, with this weird, musky, almost sweet undertone. It was absolutely disgusting. It must have gotten on me during the chase, maybe when I ducked my head and brushed against a low branch, or maybe, I don't know. The thought that one of them might have touched me, that this was some kind of secretion, made my skin crawl. I stripped the jacket off and shoved it into a trash bag, tying the bag shut. We never went back out on the snowmobiles that trip. We barely left the house. We tried to rationalize it for days. A bear? No. A group of hunters messing with us? In the middle of nowhere, moving like that? No. There was no rational explanation. That experience, it changed me. It shattered my perception of the world. I used to think things like Bigfoot were just campfire stories. I don't anymore. I know what I saw. I saw its face. I heard its hiss. I felt the wind from that rock. I smelled that god-awful goo. I'm more cautious now. I appreciate just being alive in a way I never did before, and finding communities like this one, reading other accounts. It helps. It makes me feel less alone, less crazy. But I still have nightmares. I still see those wide black eyes staring out from the trees, and sometimes on a quiet, cold night, I think I can still smell that smell. Story 2. Okay, I'll just write it out. I don't know if anyone will even read this, or believe me if they do. Most people don't. But it's been years now, and I still think about it almost every day. I still get that same cold feeling in my stomach when the sun goes down early in the winter, or when I hear a weird noise outside my apartment window. It stuck with me. This happened in Chelan, Washington. I was 16. It was a Friday night in late October. I remember the date because it was the weekend before Halloween, and all the stores were already full of cheap costumes and fake cobwebs. I was babysitting for a family a few streets over from my own house. The kid's name was Avery. He was 7. His parents were going to some anniversary party in the next town over and weren't supposed to be back until after 1 in the morning. My friend Courtney came over to keep me company. We were just going to order a pizza, watch some dumb movies on cable, and get $20 an hour for it. Seemed like the easiest money in the world. The house was nice, modern, but it backed right up against this thick line of trees, like the backyard just ended, and the forest began. No fence, just a neatly mowed lawn, and then this wall of dark pine and fir trees. It always made me a little uneasy, even in the daytime. That night, it was pitch black out there, no moon. We'd been there for a couple hours. Avery was in his pajamas, we'd put him to bed, and Courtney and I were camped out on the big sectional couch in the living room, which had a huge window looking out into that nothingness of the backyard. We were talking about school and some guy she liked, just normal stuff, half watching some comedy movie. The house was quiet, just the hum of the refrigerator and the TV, and then we heard it. It wasn't a loud noise, not at first. It was this rhythmic thumping. It came from outside, from the direction of the trees. Thump, 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 thump. It didn't sound like an animal. It sounded structured, like someone was hitting a hollow log with a stick, a deep wooden drumming sound. Courtney paused the movie. "What is that?" "I don't know," I said. "A woodpecker?" She listened for a second. "That's not a woodpecker. No way. That's way too big and slow." She was right. It was too deliberate. A woodpecker is frantic, rapid fire. This was paced. Thump, 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 thump. It went on for a full minute, maybe two. We just sat there on the couch, not moving, not talking, just listening to this creepy, percussive sound coming from the woods in the dead of night. My skin started to crawl. It felt like it was right at the edge of the tree line. Then it stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. It was a heavy, waiting silence. That's when I thought of Avery. His room was down the hall, on the side of the house closest to the woods. A stupid, panicked thought shot into my head. What if he'd heard it too and got scared? What if he went outside to look? "I'm just going to check on Avery," I said, my voice a little shaky. I got up and walked down the dark hallway. His door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open slowly. The nightlight in the shape of a spaceship cast a weak, orange glow. The bed was empty. The covers were thrown back. My heart just dropped into my feet, pure ice water in my veins. "Avery," I whispered, my throat tight. I heard a tiny shuffling sound from under the bed. I got down on my hands and knees and lifted the edge of the comforter. There he was, curled into a tight ball, his eyes wide open and staring back at me. He was trembling all over. "Avery, honey, what are you doing under there? Are you okay?" He didn't answer for a second, just kept shaking. Then he whispered so quietly I almost couldn't hear him. "It's back." "What's back, sweetie?" "The monster," he said, and a tear rolled down his cheek. "It comes when Mommy and Daddy are gone." I felt a new kind of fear then, different from the unease the drumming had caused. This was a deep, cold dread. He wasn't saying it like a kid who's scared of the dark. He was saying it like it was a fact, a thing that happened. What does it look like, the monster?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. He just shook his head and buried his face in his knees. "I don't wanna." I coaxed him out from under the bed and led him, still trembling, back to the living room with Courtney and me. I sat him on the couch between us and wrapped a blanket around his shoulders. He clutched a corner of it in his little fist, his knuckles white. Courtney and I exchanged a look. Her face was pale. "What did he say?" she mouthed. Before I could answer, we heard something else. A crack, a loud snap of a branch from the backyard. We all froze, my eyes locked with Courtney's. Avery whimpered and pressed himself against my side. "It's just a deer," Courtney said, but her voice was thin, trying to convince herself. I wasn't convinced. I stood up, my legs feeling like jelly, and walked slowly to the big window. I cupped my hands around my eyes to block out the reflection from the living room light. I peered into the darkness. At first, I couldn't see anything, just black. My own breath was fogging the glass. Then, movement. Something pale, low to the ground. It shot from the left side of the yard to the right, a blur of grayish white. It was running on all fours, but it was too big to be a dog. Way too big. The way it moved was wrong. It wasn't loping like a canine. It was more fluid and powerful, like a huge, muscular cat, but the shape was all wrong for that too. It was just a flash, maybe 2 seconds, and then it disappeared back into the deeper shadows near the trees. I stumbled back from the window, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would break them. "Did you see that?" I gasped. Courtney was on her feet now too. "See what? I didn't see anything." "There was something out there. It ran across the yard." "A person." "No," I said, and my voice broke. It wasn't a person. Avery started to cry, not loud wails, but these quiet, terrified sobs that were somehow worse. He knew exactly what it was. We stood there in the middle of the living room, a stupid comedy movie frozen on the TV screen, huddled together, listening. The house felt incredibly small and fragile, like a dollhouse. The darkness outside the windows felt like a solid thing pressing in. That's when we heard the footsteps on the gravel path that went along the side of the house. Not light, careful steps, heavy, crunching steps. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Something big was walking along the side of the house, heading towards the back. Courtney grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "The back door," she whispered. "Did we lock the back door?" I couldn't remember. My mind was a blank sheet of panic. We always locked it. Didn't we? I tried to picture myself turning the deadbolt after the pizza guy left, but I couldn't. The footsteps stopped. The silence came back, thick and suffocating. We didn't move. We barely breathed. And then it moved to the back of the house. To the window. Avery's room had a window that looked out onto the back patio. It was right next to the sliding glass door. From where we were standing in the living room, we had a diagonal view down the hall into his dark bedroom. Something rose up outside that window. It was slow. First, the top of a head. It was mostly bald with just a few patches of stringy dark hair. Then a forehead. Then the rest of its face came into view, framed by the window pane. It was pale grey, almost the colour of a dirty fish belly. Its skin looked rough like old leather, and it was covered in what looked like deep scratches or lacerations, some dark like old scabs, others fresh and pink. Its lips were this horrible, cracked bluish colour, pulled back slightly from its teeth, but its eyes were the worst part. They were small, deep-set, and held this intelligence. This wasn't the blank stare of an animal. This was a calculating, predatory look. It was looking right into the house, right at us. It felt like all the air was sucked out of the room. I couldn't scream. I couldn't even make a sound. I was paralyzed by a fear so deep and primal, it felt like my very soul was shrinking away from what I was seeing. This wasn't a story. This wasn't a movie. This was a real thing, a living thing, with a face that was grotesque and ancient and full of menace. And it was right there, just a pane of glass away from a little boy's bedroom. The thought that flashed in my mind wasn't a question of what it was, but a certainty of why it was here. It was plotting. It knew we were in here. It knew we were scared, and it was deciding what to do next. Courtney was the one who broke the spell. She let out this choked gasp and fumbled her phone out of her pocket. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely dial. She called the police. I could hear the tinny voice of the dispatcher asking for our address. Courtney was trying to talk, but she was hyperventilating. There's something outside the house, a man, a big man, or something. Please just send someone. She hung up and we just stood there watching the window. The face was still there, just staring in. It didn't move, it didn't blink. It was like a statue, a gargoyle from a nightmare, peering into our world. Then, after what felt like an hour but was probably only a minute, it lowered itself back down out of sight. We didn't see it go. It was just gone. We didn't move. We waited. We could hear our own ragged breathing and Avery's quiet crying. Every second was agony. Where was it? Was it at the back door? Was it trying to get in? Then we heard a new sound, a light, almost polite sound. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the living room window, the big one. We both turned our heads, slowly, terrified of what we would see. It was there. It had come around to the front of the house. It was crouched down low, so all we could see was the upper part of its body and its head. It was even more horrifying up close. The details were clearer, the chapped, bleeding lips, the network of scars on its face, the sheer size of it. Its head was enormous, and its hand, it was tapping on the glass with one finger. Its hand was massive, covered in the same grey, leathery skin, with long, thick fingers and dirty, broken-looking nails. Courtney later said its face was 3 times the size of a man's head, and she wasn't exaggerating. It was colossal. When it saw us looking at it, it stopped tapping. It just stared, and in its eyes, I saw it again, that cold, patient intelligence. It wasn't a mindless beast. It was observing us, studying our fear. That's when Avery completely lost it. He started screaming, this high-pitched, hysterical shriek of pure terror that I will never, ever forget. He was pointing at the window, his whole body rigid. The sound seemed to break the creature's concentration. It didn't startle or run. It just slowly tilted its head, as if curious about the noise. Then it dropped down below the windowsill and was gone. We heard the sirens then, faint at first, then growing louder, the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. Red and blue light started flashing through the windows, painting the walls. 2 police officers came to the door. We let them in, sobbing, trying to explain all at once. They shined their flashlights around the yard, the beams cutting through the dark. They found nothing. Of course they found nothing. Then one of them turned his flashlight on us. He shone it right in my eyes, then Courtney's. We must have looked a mess, pale, crying, trembling. "You girls been drinking tonight?" he asked, his voice flat, skeptical. "No," I cried. "We told you there was something out there, a creature. It was at the window." The other officer sighed. He looked tired. We get calls like this sometimes. Kids messing around in the woods, wearing ghillie suits, trying to scare people. Or it's a bear. You'd be surprised how big a bear looks at night. "It wasn't a bear," Courtney yelled, her voice cracking. "It had a face. It tapped on the window. It was looking right at us." The first officer just shook his head. He looked at Avery, who was still sobbing in my arms. "He's pretty upset. You sure you didn't let him watch a scary movie or something? Got yourselves all worked up?" They didn't believe us, not a word. They walked around the property one more time, called out, "Police!" into the woods like that would do anything, then came back and told us to lock the doors and call if we had any more problems. The way he said problems was full of dismissal. They left, and the silence and the darkness came back. Avery's parents came home a couple hours later. We tried to tell them, but we were so hysterical and the story was so insane that I could see the doubt on their faces. They were nice about it, thanked us for watching him, paid us, but I could tell they thought we'd just had a bad scare, maybe seen a coyote or a stray dog and let our imaginations run wild. They moved away about a month later. I heard through the neighborhood gossip that Avery was having terrible night terrors, and they thought a change of scenery would help. I never babysat again. I'm an adult now. I have a job, an apartment, a normal life. But what I saw that night was real. It wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't a prank. It was a living thing, something that shouldn't exist, but does. It was intelligent, it was menacing, and it knew we were there, the way it looked at us. It was like it was storing our faces away. I don't know what it wanted. I don't know why it chose that house, that night. But I know, with a certainty that sits like a stone in my gut, that it was real, and that's the part that haunts me the most. Not the fear I felt then, but the knowledge I have now. The knowledge that we are not alone out here, and that some of the things sharing these woods with us are nothing like us at all. Story 3. All right, I'll try to write this out. I don't talk about this much, not even with the guys who were there, because it sounds insane. But I've seen other people post their stuff online, and it helps to write it down. So here goes. It was May, back in '93. I remember it was a Saturday because we'd all gotten off work the night before and decided to drive up to Helen, Georgia, to do some trout fishing. We used to go up there a few times every spring. The air always had that cool, damp smell, like wet leaves and pine. And the river was so clear, you could see the trout just sitting there in the pools, their shadows dark against the stones. There were 4 of us that day, me and my friend. I'll just call him my friend because even now, saying his name feels like it might draw attention to him, and I don't want to do that, and 2 other buddies. We'd set up our gear near one of the wider bends in the river, a spot we'd fished before. It was familiar, comfortable, the kind of place you don't think twice about. My friend and I, we decided to walk up this old logging road that cut away from the river. It wasn't a real road anymore, just two muddy ruts with grass growing high between them, and the trees were thick on either side. We weren't going far, just wanted to see if there were any deeper pools upstream. The sun was out, but under the canopy it was dim, the kind of dim where your eyes have to adjust. It was quiet too, not the good kind of quiet, but the kind where you realize the birds have stopped singing. We were walking single file, me in front, him a few steps behind, just talking low about nothing, work maybe, or some game on TV. I remember the sound of our boots squelching in the mud, and the way the air felt heavy, like before a storm. I had this weird feeling, like a prickle on the back of my neck, but I shrugged it off. You get spooked in the woods sometimes. It's normal. Then we heard it. It wasn't a crack, like a branch breaking. It was a heavy, solid thud that came from right behind us. The sound was so loud and so close, it felt like it punched the air out of my lungs. I spun around, my heart already hammering in my throat, and my friend did the same. There, lying across the road, was a log, a big one, maybe 8 feet long and thick as my thigh. It was just there, laying crossways on the road like someone had just dropped it. And the thing is, that log hadn't been there seconds before we'd just walked over that spot. My eyes went past the log, into the trees where the sound came from, and that's when I saw it. Standing maybe 10, 15 feet away, just off the road in the shadow of the pines, was, I don't know what to call it, a man. It wasn't a man, it was huge. I mean, huge. It had to be 9 feet tall at least, and so broad across the shoulders it looked like it could have walked through a wall. It was covered in this long, shaggy hair, dark brown or black, like an old bearskin rug, but it hung off its body in thick mats. It was just standing there, perfectly still, and its eyes. They weren't like any animal eyes I'd ever seen. They were this reddish-brown color, like old rust or dried blood, and they were set deep under this heavy brow. They weren't blinking, they were just fixed on us, staring, not angry, not curious, just intense, like it was looking right through my skin and into my bones. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My brain was just screaming one word over and over, Bigfoot. I'd heard the stories, seen the dumb TV shows, but this wasn't a story. This was real. It was so real. The air around it seemed to warp. I could smell it too. A musky, foul smell, like wet dog and old meat, so strong it made my stomach clench. It didn't make a sound. It didn't growl or roar. It just stood there, staring with those awful red-brown eyes. And I felt this cold terror wash over me, the kind that locks your joints. My friend was frozen next to me, and I heard this tiny choked sound come out of his throat like a mouse squeak. Then the spell broke. I don't know which one of us moved first, but suddenly we were both running, not turning and jogging away, running for our lives. I've never run like that before or since. It was a blind, panicked sprint, arms pumping, legs burning, not caring about the branches whipping my face or the mud sucking at my boots. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I just ran, expecting to feel a huge hand grab my shoulder at any second, expecting to hear it crashing through the trees behind us. The world narrowed down to the muddy road under my feet and the sound of my own gasping breaths. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. All I could think was, get to the river, get to the others. The run felt like it took an hour, but it was probably less than a minute before we burst out of the trees and onto the riverbank, stumbling and nearly falling into the water. Our other 2 friends were standing by the cooler, holding beers. They took one look at us, and their smiles vanished. We were pale, shaking, covered in sweat and mud. I was bent over, hands on my knees, trying to vomit, but nothing would come up. "What the hell happened?" one of them asked. We were both talking at once, our words tumbling over each other. Something in the woods, huge, through a log. It was staring at us. They thought we'd seen a bear. A big black bear can be scary, sure. But this was different. We were genuinely terrified, the kind of scared that changes you. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I kept looking back at the tree line, expecting to see it step out into the open. After we'd calmed down enough to speak clearly, we convinced them to come back with us. Not to confront it, God no, just to see. To prove we weren't crazy. We armed ourselves with fishing knives and a big flashlight, even though it was broad daylight, and walked back up that road, the four of us this time, sticking close together. The log was still there, just lying across the road. Seeing it again, in the quiet of the afternoon, made my skin crawl. It was real. We hadn't imagined it. We walked past it slowly, toward the spot where we'd seen it. The trees were dense, the undergrowth thick, and that's when we saw the footprint. It was in a patch of soft black mud, near the base of a big pine tree, a single footprint. It was massive. I'm not exaggerating. I wear a size 12 boot, and this thing was way bigger. We measured it later with a tape measure from the truck, 18 inches long, 18 inches. It was deep too, like whatever made it weighed a ton. The toes were clear and the shape was human-like, but not quite human. It was just wrong. We stood there, staring at it. Nobody said anything for a long time. The woods were dead silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. It was like the whole forest was holding its breath. We took a few pictures with a disposable camera, but we were all too spooked to stay. We got out of there, packed up our gear in a hurry, and drove back down the mountain. We didn't even stop for food. I went back a week later with a different group of friends, guys who were into hunting and weren't as easily spooked. We searched the whole area for hours. We didn't find anything. No more prints, no hair snagged on branches, nothing. It was just a normal stretch of woods again. It was like it had never been there. But it was, and that wasn't the end of it for me. Over the years, I've gone back to those woods. I don't know why. Maybe to try and understand, or maybe just to prove to myself that it happened. And sometimes things happen. I'll be walking along a trail and I'll hear a loud knock from deep in the woods. Not a branch falling, a knock, like someone hitting a tree with a giant piece of wood. It'll happen once, then silence. Then, a few minutes later, another knock from a different direction, farther away. I've heard that more times than I can count. Other times rocks will come flying out of the trees, not little pebbles, good-sized stones, big enough to hurt if they hit you. They'll land nearby with a hard thump in the dirt. Never at me, always near me, like a warning. And the feeling, that's the worst part. The feeling of being watched. It's not a vague paranoia, it's a specific heavy pressing feeling. It starts as a tightness between my shoulder blades, and then it spreads. It's a certainty deep in my gut that there are eyes on me, that something is standing just behind the tree line, hidden, just watching. I'll stop and turn slowly, scanning the woods, but I never see it. Not again. I only ever see the shadows between the trees and the silence that feels like it's waiting. I saw it that one day, back in May of '93. I saw its size, I saw its shape, I saw those terrible reddish-brown eyes. I smelled its smell, I felt its stare like a physical weight. I know what I saw, and I know it's still out there. I go into those woods now, and I feel it. I know it remembers me, and I have no idea what it wants. Story 4. Okay, so I've never really shared this with anyone outside of a couple of people, but I've been sitting on it for years, and I guess it's time to get it out there. This happened back in the winter of 1994, when I was 15 years old. Me and my buddy, I'll just call him that, since we're still friends, but he doesn't like talking about it either. We're out fishing at this small pond near Jay Lake in West Branch State Park, Ohio. It was one of those cold gray days where the sky looks like it's made of steel and the air bites at any exposed skin. We were dumb kids, bored out of our minds, and fishing seemed like a good way to kill a Saturday, even if it was freezing. The pond was mostly frozen over, with just a patch of open water near the middle where the ice had thawed a bit, probably from some underground spring or something. I remember the ice was thick and cloudy in places, with a dusting of snow on top, and the open water was dark and choppy, like it was alive. We'd been there before a bunch of times, so it felt familiar, safe even. We parked my buddy's beat-up old car off the main road and trudged through the snow to the pond's edge. The trees around us were mostly bare, just skeletons against the sky, and the ground was crunchy under our boots. We were both bundled up in thick coats, gloves, and hats, but the cold still seeped in after a while, making our fingers numb and our noses run. We set up on the bank, not far from where the trees started to thicken. My buddy had brought his dad's fishing gear, and I had my own cheap rod. We baited our hooks with worms we'd dug up earlier, cast our lines into that open patch, and then just waited. The silence out there was heavy, broken only by the occasional crackle of ice or the distant caw of a crow. We didn't talk much at first, just focused on not freezing solid. I remember staring at the bobber in the water, watching it dip and sway, my mind drifting to school stuff or whatever. It was peaceful, in a lonely kind of way. After maybe an hour or so, we started joking around a bit, trying to keep warm. My buddy was making fun of my fishing skills, and I was giving it back to him. We were laughing, throwing snowballs at each other, just being idiots. But then something shifted. I can't pinpoint exactly when it happened, but the woods got quieter. Like the birds stopped chirping and the wind died down. It wasn't immediate, it was gradual, and at first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe it was just the cold getting to me, but I started feeling uneasy, like we were being watched. I shrugged it off though, because what else was out there? Deer, maybe, or some raccoons. Nothing to worry about. Then, out of nowhere, my buddy nudged me and pointed across the pond. "Hey, what's that?" he said, his voice low and serious all of a sudden. I followed his gaze, and that's when I saw it. Over on the other side, where the tree line met the water, something stood up. It was big, really big, and covered in dark hair. At first I thought it was a bear or something, but bears don't stand up like that, not for long anyway. This thing rose up smoothly, like it had been crouching there the whole time, and it was tall, way taller than a person. I'd say at least 7 or 8 feet, but it's hard to judge from a distance. My heart started pounding right away, like someone had kicked me in the chest. I froze, my fishing rod forgotten in my hands. The thing just stood there for a second, like it was stretching or something, and then it started walking. It moved upright, like a person, but with this weird, fluid grace that didn't look human at all. Its legs were long and powerful, and it strode up the snowy hill behind it, like the snow was nothing. I mean, the hill was steep and covered in deep snow, but this thing climbed it like it was walking on flat ground. It didn't slip or struggle, it just moved. As it walked, I could see more details. Its body was covered in thick, dark hair that looked almost black against the white snow. The hair was matted in places, like it had been through brush or something. Its arms were long, swinging slightly as it moved, and its head was broad, with no visible neck. I couldn't make out a face from that distance, but I got the impression of something primitive, almost ape-like, but not quite. It wasn't a bear, and it wasn't a person in a costume. This was something else entirely. The sheer size of it was terrifying. It looked massive, like it could crush us without even trying. About halfway up the hill, it stopped and turned to look right at us. I swear, in that moment, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. Its gaze was intense, like it was sizing us up. I couldn't see its eyes clearly, but I knew it was staring, and it felt predatory. My buddy and I were both dead silent now, not even breathing hard. I could hear my own heart thumping in my ears, and my hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped my rod. The air felt thick, like we were trapped in some kind of nightmare. We just stood there, watching it, for what felt like forever, but was probably only a minute or two. It didn't make a sound, no growl or anything, just that silent stare. Then it took a few more steps up the hill until it reached the top. It paused again, still facing us, and I got this overwhelming sense that it was in control, like we were the intruders in its territory. The way it moved was so purposeful, so confident, like it knew exactly what it was doing and didn't care that we were there. That's when it hit me. This thing wasn't afraid of the cold, wasn't afraid of us, and it wasn't some animal we'd learned about in school. This was something out of a horror story, but it was real, right in front of us. My buddy finally broke the silence, whispering, "We gotta go, now!" His voice was shaky, and I could see the fear in his eyes. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. We both dropped our fishing rods, just left them there in the snow, and started backing away slowly at first. Like if we moved too fast, it might charge us. But then the thing took a step forward, and that was it. Panic set in. We turned and ran, full sprint, through the snow toward the car. Running in deep snow is hard, especially when you're terrified. My legs felt like jelly, and every step was a struggle. I kept expecting to hear something behind us, like footsteps or a roar, but it was dead silent except for our own panting and the crunch of snow under our boots. I didn't look back. I was too scared to. My buddy was ahead of me, and I just focused on following him, my lungs burning from the cold air. The trees seemed to close in around us, branches scraping at our coats, but we didn't stop. We crashed through the underbrush, not caring about noise or anything, just desperate to get away. When we reached the car, we fumbled with the doors, our hands numb and clumsy. I remember my buddy dropping the keys in the snow and scrambling to pick them up. Finally, he got the door open and we piled in, slamming the doors shut. He started the engine and we peeled out of there, tires spinning in the snow. We didn't say a word the whole drive back. We just sat there, shaking, staring straight ahead. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that thing following us, but there was nothing, just empty road and trees. We got back to my house, and my mom asked why we were back so early. We just mumbled something about it being too cold, and she bought it. We never talked about what happened. Not really. A few days later, my buddy mentioned it briefly, saying that was messed up, and I agreed, but we didn't go into details. We avoided that pond for years after that. Even now, as adults, if someone brings up fishing there, I make an excuse. The memory of that thing, standing on the hill, staring at us, it stuck with me. I've tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear or a guy in a big coat, but deep down, I know it wasn't. The way it moved, the size, the sheer presence of it. It was something else, something I can't explain, and that's it. We never saw it again, never had any other weird experiences out there, but that one day was enough. I still get chills thinking about it, especially on cold winter days. Whatever it was, it felt ancient and powerful, and I'm just glad we got away. I don't know if it was Bigfoot or some other creature, and I don't want to know. All I know is that it happened, and it's haunted me ever since. Story 5. It was one of those October mornings where you can see your breath the second you step outside, the kind of cold that seeps right through your jacket. The year was 1973. I was 22, living out near Sullivan's Corner, and I had to be at the factory in Frederick by 6 in the morning. That meant leaving my house in the dead dark, a little after 5. My car was an old Dodge Dart, a real beater, but it was reliable. The heater took forever to warm up, so I was driving with my gloves on, the cold vinyl of the steering wheel sticking to them a little. The radio was playing some faint country station, mostly static, but it was better than the silence. The road south from Sullivan's Corner is pretty isolated, especially back then. Just a 2-lane blacktop cutting through miles of woods and swamp. Your headlights only show you what's right in front of you, and beyond that, it's just a wall of black. I was maybe 15-20 minutes into my drive, just coming up on the stretch near Highway 48, where the swamp really closes in on both sides of the road. The pine trees are thick, and there are these pockets where the mist hangs low over the water, even when it hasn't rained. I was just driving, my mind already at work, thinking about the shift ahead, not really paying attention to anything but the yellow line in the middle of the road. Then something moved at the very edge of my headlights, over on the right-hand shoulder. It was just a flicker, a dark shape in the periphery. My first thought was a deer. You see a lot of them, and they have a habit of freezing in the road, their eyes glowing like little marbles. I took my foot off the gas, ready to brake, my body tensing up the way it does. But it wasn't a deer. It came out of the trees not like an animal bounding, but like a man running, a big man. It was hunched over, its back was rounded, but its legs were working like a person's. It was on 2 feet. There was no mistaking that. It was a bipedal gait, powerful and fast, but with this heavy, loping quality that was just wrong. It was moving with a purpose, angling to cross the road right in front of me. My headlights caught it full on for maybe 2 seconds. That's all it was. 2 seconds that rewired my entire brain. Its body was covered in hair, not dark brown or black like you'd expect a bear to be, but a weird, dirty, light-colored fur, like a wet haystack. It was long and shaggy, and I could see the muscles moving underneath it as it ran. It was huge. I don't mean tall, I mean thick. Its shoulders were massive and its arms were long, swinging with its momentum. It didn't look at me. Its head was down, like it was focused solely on getting to the other side of the road. I never saw its face. The sound. I haven't mentioned the sound yet. It wasn't a roar or a scream. It was this heavy, wet, panting sound, like a dog after a hard run, but deeper, coming from a much bigger chest. I heard it through my closed car window. Ha ha ha. It was so loud, it cut through the hum of my engine and the static from the radio. My body reacted before my brain did. I slammed my foot on the brake, not a pump, but a hard, panicked stomp. The old Dart shuddered. The tires chirped on the damp pavement, and the seatbelt locked tight across my chest. The thing, the creature, was so close that for a heart-stopping moment I was sure I was going to hit it. The front of my car was pointing right at its legs. But it was fast, unbelievably fast. It cleared the 2 lanes in 3, maybe 4 of those powerful strides. It moved from the beam of my right headlight through the full glare of both and into the darkness on the left side of the road in less time than it takes to gasp. It just vanished back into the wall of trees and swamp mist. My car came to a stop, skewed a little diagonally in my lane. The engine was still running. I was gripping the steering wheel so hard, my knuckles were white, my fingers aching inside my gloves. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic, painful pounding. My mouth was dry as dust. I just sat there staring at the empty spot on the road where it had been. The mist swirled in my headlights. The trees were just a dark mass. There was nothing there, no sound, no movement. The wet panting was gone. It was as if it had never been there at all. But the smell, oh God, the smell. It had come in through the car vents in that split second, a thick, heavy, musky odor. It smelled like a wet dog, but mixed with something else, something rotten and earthy, like a bog or a long-dead animal. It was a physical presence in my car, clinging to the air. I started coughing, my throat closing up from the stench. I fumbled for the vent controls and shut them off, but the smell lingered. It was in my nose, in my clothes. I can still remember it if I think about it too hard. My first coherent thought wasn't Bigfoot or monster. It was, that wasn't a man. I'd heard the jokes around town, in the diner. Frederick had a reputation. People talked about lights in the sky, strange figures in the woods. The old-timers would mention the shaggy men, and everyone would laugh, write it off as drunk hunters or hippies living rough in the state forest. That's what I tried to tell myself, a hippie, a big, hairy guy living off the land. But my gut, my entire nervous system was screaming that it was a lie. No hippie moves like that. No hippie is built like that. No hippie smells like that. The sheer power in its movement was feral. It was pure, raw animal power, but in the shape of a man. I don't know how long I sat there, maybe 30 seconds, maybe a full minute. It felt like an hour. I was paralyzed, just staring into the woods, expecting it to come back out, expecting to see those 2 seconds replay themselves. My eyes were straining, trying to pierce the darkness between the trees, looking for a patch of that light-colored fur, for the glow of an eye. Finally, a survival instinct kicked in. Get out of here. Now. I shoved the gear shift into drive and stomped on the gas. The Dart's engine roared and the tires spun for a second before catching. I sped down that road, my eyes flicking between the road ahead and my rearview mirror. I was waiting to see it behind me, chasing the car. It felt like something that could easily catch up. I didn't slow down until I saw the first lights of Frederick in the distance. My whole body was trembling, a fine, uncontrollable shake that made it hard to keep the car steady. My hands were slick with sweat inside my gloves. I pulled into the factory parking lot and just sat there for a long time with the engine off, watching the other employees trickle in. They were laughing, drinking coffee from thermoses, completely normal. Their world hadn't just been torn open. I went through the workday in a complete daze. My hands were doing the job on the assembly line, but my mind was back on that road. Every loud noise from the machinery made me jump. The smell of oil and metal couldn't erase the memory of that musky, rotten stench. I kept replaying those 2 seconds over and over in my head, examining every detail. The way its fur moved, the sheer bulk of its back, the sound of its breathing, the effortless, terrifying speed. At my break, I almost said something to the guy next to me, an older fellow named Jerry. I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. How do you start that conversation? Hey, Jerry, I think I almost hit Bigfoot on my way to work this morning. He would have laughed me out of the break room. He'd have told everyone I'd be the Sasquatch girl forever. So I kept my mouth shut and drank my coffee, my hands shaking so badly I sloshed some on my pants. After my shift, driving home in the late afternoon light was a whole new kind of terror. The sun was out, the woods looked normal, almost friendly. But I knew what was in there now. I drove that same stretch of road at a crawl, my foot hovering over the brake. I scanned every shadow, every gap between the trees. The spot where it happened looked utterly mundane, just a road, some trees, a swamp. There was no sign. No giant footprints on the asphalt. Nothing. That night, and for many nights after, I slept with my bedroom light on. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside my window sent a jolt of pure fear through me. I started reading everything I could find. I went to the library and looked through old newspapers, books on local folklore. I found a few mentions of wild men of the woods in old logging tales. Then I found a small, typed newsletter from a group of people who investigated strange phenomena. There were a few accounts from right around Frederick, people reporting tall, hairy figures watching them from the tree line. A family that claimed something had thrown rocks at their hunting cabin, and lights. Several reports of strange, silent lights moving over the swamps near Highway 48. Reading those accounts didn't make me feel better. It made it worse. It confirmed that I wasn't crazy, but it also confirmed that this thing, whatever it was real. It was out there, and other people had seen it too. The term shaggy men took on a whole new, horrifying meaning. It wasn't a joke anymore. It was a name for something that shouldn't exist, but did. I never saw it again. I started taking a different, longer route to work, adding an extra 15 minutes to my commute just to avoid that stretch of road. I never went hiking in those woods again. For years, every time I had to drive south at night, my heart would start pounding as I approached that area. The fear never really left me. It just became a part of me, a low-grade hum of anxiety that flares up whenever I think about it. What has kept me up at night for decades, is the simple, terrifying fact of it. It wasn't looking for me. It didn't charge my car. It didn't roar or beat its chest. It was just crossing the road. It was going about its business, living its life in those swamps, completely hidden from us, until our paths crossed for 2 seconds in the beam of my headlights. It was so normal. in its own way. And that's the most frightening part of all. It wasn't a monster from a movie. It was just an animal, a creature that should not be, going from one patch of woods to another. And I was the one who was trespassing. I was the one who got a glimpse into a world I was never supposed to see. And that glimpse... Story 6. It was the summer I turned 16, and I was stuck out in Hump Tulips, Washington, at my relative's place on Bowes Road. I say stuck because, to a kid from the suburbs, it was the middle of nowhere. The kind of quiet that's so deep it has a weight to it, pressing down on you after dark. The house was old, surrounded by woods so thick they seemed to swallow the daylight. I'd been there a couple of weeks, and the novelty of fresh air and nature had worn off, replaced by a low-grade boredom and the constant faint smell of pine and damp earth. That night, I'd gone to bed late, maybe around 1 in the morning, after reading a comic book with a flashlight under the covers. My room was on the second floor, a small one at the back of the house with a window that looked out over the backyard. There was a big mercury vapor light on a pole out there, one of those old ones that cast a weird bluish-white light, making everything look both stark and unreal. Beyond the circle of that light, it was just a wall of blackness, the woods. I must have fallen into a deep sleep because the next thing I knew, I was jolted awake by the sound of Baron, their German shepherd, going absolutely insane. It wasn't his normal bark at a raccoon or a passing car. This was different. It was a frantic, screaming, panicked bark, the kind that raises the hair on your arms even before your brain is fully awake. It was a sound of pure terror, and it was coming from right below my window. My heart was already hammering in my chest. I remember the feeling of the cold sweat on my back, instantly soaking my t-shirt. The digital clock on my bedside table glowed red, 3:07. I pushed myself up, the sheets tangling around my legs, and crawled to the window. The wood of the floor was cold under my knees. I peered out, my breath fogging the glass for a second before I wiped it clear with the heel of my hand. Baron was in the middle of the yard, just at the edge of the circle of light. He was planted on all fours, his body rigid, his head low, and he was barking his head off, a continuous sharp yap, yap, yap that was shredding the silence of the night. He wasn't looking at the tree line. He was staring at something inside the light, and then I saw it. At first, my brain didn't want to process it. It was just a shape. A massive dark shape moving near the base of the light pole. I thought it was a bear. We had black bears around and that was scary enough, but this was wrong. The proportions were wrong. It was too upright. It moved, and the way it moved sent a jolt of ice water straight down my spine. It wasn't a lumbering walk. It was this awkward, lurching gait, but it covered so much ground. It was all wrong. It stepped fully into the brightest part of the mercury light, and I swear my heart just stopped. It was huge. I can't even give you a height because my mind was reeling, but it was taller than any man I'd ever seen. It had to be 7.5, 8 feet tall, easy, and it wasn't just tall. It was built, shoulders like a powerlifter, thick through the chest and arms. It was covered in what looked like short fur, but it wasn't like a bear's fur. It was a weird color, a brownish silver like wet tree bark in the moonlight. The light from the vapor lamp made its hide look slick, almost oily. It took 3 steps, just 3. But they weren't normal steps. They were these long, fluid strides like it was gliding, but its body seemed to struggle with the motion, like it was too heavy for its own legs. In 3 steps, it went from being near the light pole to almost reaching the edge of the trees. The distance had to be 40, 50 feet. It moved with this impossible silent speed. There was no sound, no crack of a twig, no rustle of leaves. Just Baron's frantic, desperate barking and the blood roaring in my own ears. And then it stopped. It was right at the tree line, its back to me, 1 foot in the light, 1 in the shadow. Baron was still going crazy, charging forward a few feet, then skittering back, his barks turning into high-pitched whines. He was brave, but he was terrified. I could see the whites of his eyes all the way from my window. The creature turned its head. It didn't turn its whole body. Its head just swiveled on that thick neck, and it looked down at the dog. That's when I saw its face. It was maybe 50 feet away from the house, and the light was bright enough that I could see it with a horrifying clarity. It wasn't a bear's face, it wasn't an ape's face, it was human-like. But not human. It had a heavy brow ridge, but beneath that, the eyes were deep set. I couldn't see the color, but I could see they were focused, intelligent. They weren't the dumb, glazed eyes of an animal. They were taking in the scene. Its nose was broad and flat, and its mouth. It was just a line, a severe downturned line in a face that was powerful and ancient and utterly alien. It looked down at Baron, and for a single heart-stopping second the barking stopped. Baron let out a single, terrified yelp and cowered, dropping to his belly and whining, his tail tucked so far between his legs it was gone. The creature's gaze held the dog for a moment longer, and then, as if it had made a decision, it turned its head just a little more. It looked right at my window. It looked right at me. I froze. I literally could not move. Every muscle in my body locked up. It was like a bucket of ice water had been dumped over my head. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt a cold sweat break out all over my body. I was pinned there, on my knees, my hands gripping the windowsill so hard my knuckles were white. Its eyes weren't glowing, or anything demonic like in the movies. They were just dark, bottomless pits, and they were fixed on me. It knew I was there. It had known the whole time. The thought screaming in my head was simple and primal. It can see me. It sees me watching it. We stayed like that for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 3 or 4 seconds. A lifetime. I could see the texture of the fur on its cheek, the way the light caught the powerful line of its jaw. I could see the sheer mass of it, the raw, physical power contained in that frame. It could have torn the house apart if it wanted to. Then it just turned away. It didn't snarl, it didn't make a sound. It simply turned its head back towards the woods, took one more of those long, lurching steps, and melted into the shadows between the trees. It was gone. Just like that. The silence that followed was louder than Baron's barking had been. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. Baron stayed on his belly, whining softly. I stayed on my knees, trembling so hard my teeth were chattering. I couldn't look away from the spot where it had disappeared. I was waiting for it to come back. I was convinced it was just playing a game, that it would come bursting out of the trees and come straight for the house. But nothing happened. The minutes dragged on. The blue-white light of the mercury lamp illuminated an empty yard. The normal night sounds, the crickets, the frogs, slowly started up again, tentatively. My body began to unlock, and a wave of nausea hit me so hard I thought I was going to be sick. I scrambled back from the window, crawling on my hands and knees to my bed, and I just curled up in a ball on the floor, shaking. I didn't sleep another wink. I just lay there listening, every creak of the old house making me jump, every gust of wind sounding like a footstep. When the first hints of dawn started to turn the sky from black to grey, I finally felt like I could move. My body was stiff and aching from tension. I forced myself to stand and go back to the window. The yard was just a yard now. Baron was gone, probably back to his doghouse. Everything looked normal, but it wasn't. It would never be normal again. I didn't know what to do. Who do you tell that you saw a monster in your backyard? My relatives were good people, but they were practical. They'd think I'd had a nightmare. I decided to keep it to myself. I got dressed with clumsy fingers and went downstairs. The house was quiet. My aunt was in the kitchen, starting coffee. She asked if I'd slept okay, and I just mumbled something and nodded, my throat too tight to form real words. It was my 2 older cousins, Mark and Jessie, who noticed something was off with me. They found me later that morning, sitting on the back porch steps, just staring into the woods. I must have looked like hell. I felt like hell. "You see a ghost or something?" Mark joked, nudging me with his foot. I looked up at them, and the words just tumbled out. I didn't try to make it sound believable. I just told them what I saw, stammering, my voice shaking. I described the size, the color, the way it moved, the face. I told them about it looking at me. To my surprise, they didn't laugh. They exchanged a look, a serious, knowing look I'd never seen on their faces before. "Show us," Jesse said quietly. I led them to the spot near the tree line where I'd last seen it. The grass was damp with morning dew, and there, in the soft, dark earth, right at the edge of the woods, was a footprint. It wasn't a blurry, half-formed impression. It was perfect, crisp, like it had been pressed into the mud just minutes before. It was a bare foot, but it was like no human foot I'd ever seen. It was massive. I wear a size 10 shoe. This was easily twice as long and just as wide. The toes were distinct, but the print was so deep, the arch was so high. It spoke of an immense weight. We just stood there, the three of us staring down at it. None of us said a word. The air felt cold. Then Jesse pointed. A little ways off, about 7 or 8 feet up in a young pine tree, a branch was bent, not broken but bent down at a sharp angle, as if something incredibly heavy had grabbed it and used it for support. The bark was scraped clean off in places. No deer or bear could have done that. It was too high, and the bend was too deliberate. That was the confirmation. That was the moment it shifted from a scary story I'd told to a real thing that had happened. The chill that went through me wasn't just fear anymore. It was something else, something deeper, a profound, unsettling awe. We never told my aunt and uncle. My cousins just looked at me, and Mark said, "You saw one. Don't go telling people. They'll think you're crazy." We went back inside, and we never spoke about it again. The rest of the summer, I slept with my curtains drawn tight and a baseball bat next to my bed. I never went into those woods, not even in the bright light of midday. The memory of that face, those eyes locking with mine, was burned into my brain. In the years since, the terror has faded, replaced by this weird, complicated feeling. It's hard to explain. It's not that I'm not still scared when I think about it. I am. I get chills. My palms get sweaty. But mixed in with the fear is this sense of privilege. I saw something that isn't supposed to exist, something ancient and powerful that lives in the hidden corners of the world, just out of sight. It showed me for a few seconds how little we really know, how much wilderness is still out there, holding its secrets. I'm a grown man now, with a job and a family, living in a city 1,000 miles from hump tulips. But sometimes, on a quiet night, if I hear a dog bark in a certain way, I'm right back there. I'm 16 years old, on my knees, frozen at the window, staring into the face of something that looked back at me and saw me, truly saw me, before it turned and walked away into the dark, leaving me with a perfect footprint in the mud and a question that will never, ever have an answer. Story 7. It was one of those perfect summer days in 1996, the kind you only get up in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. The air was warm but not heavy. The sky was this clear, endless blue, and the smell of pine and damp earth was everywhere. Me and my 2 buddies, we were probably 16 or 17 at the time, had decided to spend the day riding our dirt bikes on this old, abandoned stretch of highway south of Marquette. This wasn't some official trail or anything. It was a forgotten piece of old Route 41, I think, that had been bypassed by a newer road years before. The pavement was all cracked and busted up, with weeds and small trees pushing their way through the asphalt. The forest pressed in tight on both sides, a solid wall of dark green. It was our own private playground, miles of empty road, where the only sounds were our bike engines and our own stupid yelling. We'd been out there for a couple hours already, just messing around, seeing who could get the most air off a small rise in the road. I was out in front, just me and the buzz of my engine, the wind whipping past my face. My friends were a couple hundred yards back. I could just hear the faint whine of their bikes behind me. The sun was dappling through the trees and everything felt good, normal. Then I saw the fallen tree. It was a big pine, must have come down in a storm, and it was lying right across the road, maybe 100 feet ahead of me. It wasn't a huge obstacle. I could have gone around it easy, but it made me slow down a little. And that's when I saw it. A flash of movement to the right, in the tree line just past where the tree had fallen. My first thought was a deer. You see a lot of deer up there, but this was different. It was lower to the ground, and the movement was deliberate. I rolled to a stop, my front tire just a few feet from the trunk of that fallen pine. I killed the engine. The sudden silence was heavy, pressing in on my ears after the roar of the bike. I squinted into the shadows between the trees. That's when I saw the figure. It was crouched down low, almost like it was hiding, right at the edge where the forest met the broken pavement. It was big, not bear big, but tall, even crouching, and it was covered in hair. Not fur, like a dog, but this long, shaggy, dull, dark brown hair, the color of a wet moose or old, dry mud. It looked rough, unkempt, like it had been sleeping in the dirt for a month. My brain was scrambling, trying to make it into something I knew. A guy in a fur coat, a weird stump. But then it started to move. It began to rise, not fast, not aggressive. It was slow, unnervingly slow, unfolding itself from that crouch. It straightened its legs, its back, and just stood up, on 2 feet, fully upright. It was taller than any man I'd ever seen. 7 feet at least, maybe more. Its arms were long, hanging down past its knees. I couldn't see its face clearly from that distance, maybe 50 feet away, but I got an impression of a heavy brow, and its head seemed to sit directly on its shoulders without much of a neck. My breath caught in my throat. A cold wave, starting at the base of my spine, just washed over my whole body. It was pure, undiluted terror, the kind that freezes you solid. My heart wasn't just beating fast, it was slamming against my ribs like it was trying to get out. My hands were locked on the handlebars, my knuckles white. I couldn't have moved if I wanted to. The creature just stood there on the cracked grey pavement, completely motionless. It wasn't looking around, it wasn't sniffing the air, it was staring directly at me. I felt the weight of that stare, a physical pressure. It was intelligent. I know that sounds crazy, but you could feel it. This wasn't some dumb animal looking at a potential threat. It was assessing me, studying me. The woods had gone dead quiet. No birds, no insects, nothing. It was like the whole forest was holding its breath with me. Those few seconds felt like an hour. My mind was screaming, a jumble of, "What is that?" And "Oh God, oh God, oh God." I could smell the gasoline from my bike, the pine sap from the fallen tree, and my own sweat which had gone cold and clammy. Then I heard the whine of the other bikes getting closer. My friends were catching up. The sound seemed to break the spell. I found my voice, a raw, choked shout that didn't even sound like me. "Hey, look at that!" I yelled, my arm shooting out to point, my eyes never leaving the thing. The creature turned its head. It wasn't a quick, jerky movement. It was a smooth, powerful turn of its head in the direction of my friend's approaching noise. For a split second, its gaze was off me, and I could breathe again, a sharp, ragged gasp. Then it moved. It didn't run like a man. It didn't lumber like a bear. It lunged. One moment it was standing on the pavement. The next it was already halfway up this steep, 8-foot embankment on the other side of the road. It moved with this shocking, fluid grace. Its powerful legs just propelled it upwards. It didn't scramble or use its hands. It just went up, like the slope was nothing. It hit the top of the embankment and vanished into the trees. But I saw one more thing. There was a huge, fallen log, like 3 or 4 feet thick, right in its path. It didn't go around it. It didn't climb over it. It jumped, a single effortless bound that cleared the entire log, its long legs tucking up and then extending as it landed silently on the other side and disappeared into the deep shadows of the woods. The whole thing, from the lunge to the jump to it being gone, took maybe 2 seconds. 3, tops. My 2 friends skidded to a stop beside me, their engines sputtering and dying. What is it?" one of them asked, his voice loud in the silence. "Did you see it?" I demanded, my voice still shaking. I was trembling all over, a fine, uncontrollable shake. "Did you see it?" See what, man? We saw you pointing and yelling. It was right there, I said, gesturing wildly at the empty pavement and the embankment. It was standing right there. It was huge. It was covered in hair. It ran up that hill. They looked at the embankment, then back at me. Their faces were a mix of confusion and concern. Dude, we didn't see anything. A bear. It wasn't a bear, I almost shouted. My heart was still hammering. It stood up on 2 feet. It looked right at me. The 3 of us just sat there on our bikes for a minute. The only sound, our heavy breathing. The normal forest sounds were starting to trickle back in. A bird chirped somewhere. The leaves rustled in a light breeze. But the normalcy felt fake, like a thin curtain pulled over something monstrous. I kept staring at the spot where it had vanished. My eyes traced the path it took up the embankment. There were no broken branches, no scuff marks in the dirt and pine needles. Nothing. It had moved so lightly, so powerfully, it hadn't left a trace. That detail stuck with me. Something that big should have torn up the ground. "We should go," my other friend said quietly. He wasn't arguing anymore. He could see I was genuinely terrified, and the absolute quiet of the place was starting to get to him too. "Yeah," I said. My voice was hoarse. "Yeah, let's go." Starting my bike felt like a monumental task. My hands were still shaking so bad I fumbled with the kickstart. The roar of the engine, which usually felt so powerful and freeing, now just felt loud and vulnerable. It was like we were announcing our location to everything in the woods. We didn't race back. We rode slowly, staying close together, our heads on a swivel, scanning the tree line on both sides of the road. Every shadow looked like a crouching form. Every rustle of leaves sounded like a heavy footstep. The joy of the ride was completely gone, replaced by a thick, gnawing dread. The 5-mile ride back to where we'd parked the truck felt like 50 miles. Nobody talked. What was there to say? I knew what I'd seen, and they knew I'd seen something. That had scared the life out of me. The silence between us was heavy, full of unspoken questions and fear. When we finally got back to the gravel pull-off, where my buddy's beat-up Ford pickup was parked, we loaded the bikes into the bed with a speed and efficiency we'd never managed before. We weren't joking around. We weren't taking our time. We just wanted to be inside the cab, with the doors locked. The slam of the truck doors was the most comforting sound I'd ever heard. My friend turned the key, and the engine rumbled to life. He didn't even wait for the heater to kick in. He just threw it in gear and pulled out onto the main road, heading back towards town. We drove for a good 10 minutes before anyone spoke. "So," the one who was driving said, his eyes glued to the road, What did it look like? For real?" I took a deep breath. I'd been replaying it in my head the whole ride back, and now I had to put it into words. It was tall, really tall. Like taller than your dad's garage door. And it was all covered in this long brown hair. It wasn't shiny. It was kind of matted, like it had been rolling in dirt and leaves. When it stood up, it just stood up, man, like a person. And it looked right at me. Its eyes, I couldn't see the color, but I could feel them. It was smart. You could tell it was thinking. The guy in the passenger seat shook his head. "And it just ran up that bank?" "It didn't run," I corrected him, my voice low. "It lunged. It took one step and it was halfway up, and then it jumped over that giant log like it was a curb. It was fast, faster than anything I've ever seen. It wasn't clumsy. It was graceful, in a really scary way." We all fell silent again. There wasn't anything else to add. We spent the rest of the drive just staring out the windows. But now the beautiful Michigan landscape just looked like a million places. Something could be hiding, watching. We got back to my house and unloaded the bikes without a word. The usual "see you later" felt hollow. We just kind of nodded at each other and went our separate ways. I went inside, and my mum asked how the riding was. I just said fine and went straight to my room. I didn't tell my parents. What would I have said? I knew how it sounded. I sat on my bed for a long time, just staring at the wall. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving me feeling hollow and exhausted. But my nerves were still jangling. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. The slow rise, the motionless stare, the powerful fluid leap. That was the day. I've gone over it in my head 1,000 times since. I've read books, I've watched shows, I know what people call it. But that doesn't really matter. What matters is the feeling. That cold, gut-level terror when something impossible looks you right in the eye and proves you don't know the world as well as you thought you did. The silence in the woods, the way it moved. I can still see it clear as day, every single detail, and I still don't have a single explanation that makes any sense to me. It was just there, and then it was gone, and I've never been the same since. Story 8. Hey, so I never thought I'd be writing this down, but I need to get it out there. I'm still kind of shaken up, even though it's been a little while now. I was staying with my grandma out in the woods, about an hour outside of Missoula, Montana. She'd just had surgery, and I was helping her out for a few weeks. Her place is way out there, deep in the forest, where the nearest neighbor is miles away. It's peaceful usually, the kind of quiet that sinks into your bones. But that one evening, everything changed. It was a typical day leading up to it. I'd been there for about a week, and I'd settled into a routine. Wake up, make breakfast for us both, help Grandma with her meds, and then maybe read or just sit on the porch, listening to the wind in the pines. That day, the air felt different, though. Not in a bad way, just heavier. Like something was waiting. I didn't think much of it at the time. Grandma was napping most of the afternoon, and I was feeling cooped up. The house is small, and with her recovering, I didn't want to make noise, so I decided to go for a walk. It was around 5 in the evening, I think. The sun was starting to dip, casting long shadows through the trees. I slipped on my boots and told Grandma I'd be back in an hour or so. She just nodded from her chair, half asleep. Stepping outside, the air was cool and smelled like damp earth and pine needles. The path behind her house is one she's walked for years. It winds through a thick part of the forest, following a small creek for a bit before looping back. I'd been on it a few times already, so I wasn't worried. At first it was nice. The birds were chirping and I could hear the creek bubbling softly. I remember thinking how lucky she was to live out here, away from all the noise of the city. I walked for maybe 40 minutes, just letting my mind wander. The light was fading faster than I expected, turning everything a deep orange and purple. The trees started to look taller, more imposing, like they were closing in. I've never been scared of the woods, but that day I felt a little uneasy. It was stupid, really, just the quiet getting to me. I kept hearing little rustles in the underbrush, but I figured it was squirrels or deer. I've seen plenty of wildlife out here. Rabbits, the occasional fox, even a bear once from a distance. But this felt different. About an hour into the walk, I decided to head back. Grandma would be waking up soon, and I didn't want her to worry. I turned around on the path, which was narrow and covered in fallen leaves. The sound of my footsteps was loud in the silence. Crunch, crunch, crunch. That's when I noticed something up ahead. At first, I thought it was a tree stump or a shadow, but it moved, just a slight shift, like something stepping to the side. I froze mid-step, my heart suddenly pounding in my ears. I squinted, trying to see through the dim light, and that's when I saw it. Standing on the path, maybe 50 feet away, was this huge, furry thing. It was upright, on 2 legs, and it had to be at least 7 feet tall. I'm not exaggerating, it was massive, with broad shoulders and long arms hanging down. Its body was covered in dark, matted fur, almost black against the fading light. For a second I thought it was a bear, but bears don't stand like that. Not for long. This thing was perfectly balanced, like a person. My brain couldn't process it. I just stood there, frozen, my breath caught in my throat. Then it turned its head and I saw its eyes. They were big and dark, almost black, and they locked right onto me. I felt this cold wave wash over me like I'd been dunked in ice water. My legs felt like jelly and I couldn't move, couldn't even blink. It just stared at me and I stared back. Time seemed to slow down. I could hear my own heartbeat thumping in my chest, so loud I was sure it could hear it too. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no wind, nothing. Just us, staring at each other. I don't know how long we stood like that. Maybe 10 seconds, maybe a minute. It felt like forever. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what it was. Bigfoot, no, that's crazy, I thought. But what else could it be? It wasn't a person in a suit. The way it moved was too fluid, too natural. Its fur ruffled slightly in the breeze, and I could see muscles shifting under it. Then, without making a sound, it turned away from me. It didn't run or hurry. It just walked off the path and into the trees, moving with this eerie grace. Its footsteps were quiet, almost silent. Unlike my clumsy crunching, as soon as it disappeared into the shadows, the spell broke. I gasped, sucking in air like I'd been holding my breath the whole time. My body unlocked, and I stumbled backward, almost falling. Then I turned and ran. I didn't look back, I just ran, my legs pumping as fast as they could. Branches slapped at my face, and I tripped over roots, but I didn't stop. All I could think was, get back to the house. Get to Grandma. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it would burst, and my lungs burned with every breath. The path seemed longer on the way back, like it had stretched out. Every shadow looked like it was moving. Every sound made me jump. I burst out of the trees and into the clearing around Grandma's house. Panting and sweating, I yanked the door open and slammed it behind me, leaning against it to catch my breath. Grandma was sitting in her chair, awake now, and she looked up at me with concern. "What's wrong, honey?" she asked, her voice calm. I was shaking, my hands trembling as I tried to speak. I told her everything, stumbling over my words. The thing on the path, the eyes, how it just walked away. I expected her to be scared too, or to think I was crazy. But she just nodded slowly, like I'd told her I saw a deer. "Oh, that's just the wood ape," she said. Like it was the most normal thing in the world, I stared at her, my mind reeling. "Wood ape?" I repeated, my voice shaky. She explained that she's seen it a few times over the years, always from a distance. She said it's harmless, just curious, and that it lives out in the deeper parts of the forest. She told me not to worry, that it's been around longer than she has, and it's never bothered anyone. Her calmness was surreal. Here I was, freaking out, and she's talking about it like it's a neighbor. I sat down on the couch, my legs still wobbly. The adrenaline was fading, leaving me exhausted and confused. Grandma went back to her knitting, like nothing had happened. I couldn't let it go, though. Later that night, after she'd gone to bed, I pulled out my phone and started researching. Wood ape, Bigfoot, Sasquatch. I found stories from other people in Montana, accounts that sounded just like mine. The height, the fur, the dark eyes, the way it moves silently. It hit me then. I'd seen something most people think is a myth, and Grandma's reaction made it even weirder. She's lived out here her whole life, and she just accepts it. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those dark eyes staring at me. I kept replaying the moment in my head, the way it stood there, so still, like it was studying me. I wasn't scared in the same way anymore. It was more like awe, mixed with a deep, unsettled feeling. Why did it look at me? Why didn't it run? The more I thought about it, the more I realized how little we know about the world. I'd always been a skeptic, but now I believe, not in monsters, but in things we can't explain. The next few days, I stayed close to the house. I didn't go back into the woods, not even during the day. Grandma noticed, but she didn't push it. She'd just smile and say, "The forest has its secrets." I started paying more attention to the sounds around the house, the owls at night, the coyotes howling in the distance. It all felt more alive, more mysterious. I even found myself looking out the window, half expecting to see it again, but I never did. That encounter changed something in me. I've got a new respect for the wilderness out here, for the unknown. It's not something to be feared, but to be acknowledged. I still don't know what it was, not really. Bigfoot, wood ape, whatever you want to call it, it's out there, and it's real. And every time I think about it, I get this chill, like I'm back on that path, frozen and staring into those dark eyes. I'll never forget it, and I'll never look at the woods the same way again. Story 9. Okay, so I've never really told this to anyone outside of my husband, and even then, we don't talk about it much because it just feels too weird to put into words. But I've been sitting on this for decades, and I guess writing it down might help somehow. It was the spring of 1966, and my husband and I were living in Beaufort County, South Carolina at the time. We were both in our late 20s, just married a couple years back, and life was pretty simple. He worked at the local mill, and I helped out with odd jobs here and there. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and that was enough. That particular evening, we decided to take a drive out to the South Pier. It was one of those spots we'd go to when we wanted to get away from everything. Just a quiet place by the water where you could hear the crickets and the occasional fish jumping. The pier wasn't anything fancy. It was old and wooden, kind of rickety in places, with a small parking area that overlooked the lake. We'd packed a simple dinner, some sandwiches and a thermos of coffee, and headed out around 7 o'clock, just as the sun was starting to dip below the trees. The air was cool, but not cold, with that damp spring smell that hangs in the air after a light rain earlier in the day. I remember the drive there was peaceful. We had the windows down, and the radio was playing some soft music, but mostly we were just quiet, enjoying the scenery. The roads were empty, just us and the occasional pair of headlights in the distance. When we pulled into the parking area at the pier, it was already getting dark. The moon was out, a big, bright one that night, casting long shadows through the trees and making the water look almost silver where it rippled. We parked the car facing the lake, an old Chevrolet pickup my husband had fixed up himself. It was our pride and joy back then, reliable and sturdy. We sat there for a while, eating our sandwiches and sipping coffee, not saying much. The silence was comfortable, the kind you only get when you're really at ease with someone. I remember leaning back in the seat, feeling the worn fabric of the bench seat under my legs, and just watching the moonlight dance on the water. My husband had his arm around me, and I could feel the warmth of his body through my jacket. It was one of those moments where everything felt right, like the world had slowed down just for us. But then, something shifted. I don't know how to describe it exactly, but the air got heavier, if that makes sense. The crickets stopped chirping all at once, like someone had flipped a switch. I remember feeling a chill, even though it wasn't that cold, and I pulled my jacket tighter. My husband must have felt it too, because he sat up straighter, his hand dropping from my shoulder to the steering wheel. "You hear that?" he whispered, his voice low and tense. I shook my head, but then I did hear it. A faint rustling sound coming from behind a large rock off to the left of the pier. The rock was about the size of a small car, covered in moss and shadows, and it stood maybe 20 yards away from where we were parked. At first, I thought it might be an animal, a deer or a raccoon, because we'd seen plenty of those around there. But this sounded different, heavier, like whatever it was big. We both leaned forward, peering out the windshield, trying to see through the darkness. The moonlight was bright enough to outline the shapes of the trees and the rock, but the details were swallowed up by shadows. My heart started beating faster. A dull thud in my chest that made my ears ring. I could feel my palms getting sweaty, and I wiped them on my jeans. "Maybe we should go," I said, my voice coming out as a whisper too. But my husband shook his head. "Wait," he said, his eyes fixed on the rock. "I want to see what it is." The rustling got louder, and then we saw movement. Something was shifting behind the rock. Something dark and bulky. It wasn't smooth like an animal moving gracefully. It was jerky, almost awkward, like it was struggling to stay hidden. I held my breath, my fingers gripping the edge of the seat. The air felt thick, hard to breathe, and I could smell the damp earth and something else, a musky, earthy scent that I'd never noticed before, like wet fur and old leaves. Then as the moonlight hit the area just right, the thing emerged from behind the rock. I swear my blood ran cold. It was hunched over, like it was crouching, but even then it looked tall, maybe 7 feet or more. Its body was covered in dark, matted hair that seemed to absorb the light, making it blend into the shadows. But what got me were its arms. They were long, too long for a person, and they swung loosely as it moved, almost dragging on the ground. It didn't walk like a human or any animal I'd ever seen. It lurched forward in a way that was both slow and purposeful, like it was testing the ground with each step. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I just stared, frozen, as it took a few steps toward us. Its head was low, and I couldn't see its face clearly, but I got the impression of something ape-like, with a heavy brow and a broad, flat nose. It didn't make any noise, no growls or grunts, just the sound of its feet crunching on the gravel and leaves. That silence was worse than any sound it could have made. It felt intentional, like it was hunting. My husband didn't hesitate. He reached for the ignition key and turned it, and the truck's engine roared to life. Then he flipped the headlights on. The sudden burst of light was blinding after the darkness, and for a second I couldn't see anything. But then I saw the creature. It froze for a split second, its body tensing up. The light caught it full on, and I could see the hair on its arms and back, thick and coarse, almost like bristles. Its eyes, I'll never forget this. They reflected the light, glowing a dull red, like an animal's eyes do, but bigger, more intense. And then it moved. It didn't just run. It exploded into motion, turning and bolting into the woods behind the rock. The speed was unbelievable, faster than anything I'd ever seen. It wasn't a human run. It was a loping, powerful gait that covered ground in huge strides, its arms pumping as it disappeared into the trees. One moment it was there, and the next it was gone, like it had never been there at all. The whole thing couldn't have lasted more than a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. I sat there, trembling, my whole body shaking uncontrollably. My husband was breathing heavily, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were white. We both just stared at the spot where it had vanished, not saying a word. The headlights were still on, casting a beam into the woods, but there was nothing there now, just shadows and trees swaying gently in the breeze. The crickets had started up again, but it didn't make me feel any better. It just made the silence that followed feel even more eerie. After what felt like forever, my husband slowly put the truck in reverse and backed us out of the parking spot. He didn't turn off the headlights until we were on the main road, and even then, he drove faster than usual, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror every few seconds. I kept looking out the window, half expecting to see that thing following us, but there was nothing, just the dark road and the trees whipping by. We didn't talk much on the way home. What was there to say? We both knew what we'd seen, but it didn't make any sense. It wasn't a bear. Bears don't move like that, and they're not that tall or lanky. It wasn't a person in a costume, because no one could run that fast, especially not in the dark over rough terrain. My mind kept going back to the way it moved, that unnatural speed, and the way it just vanished into the woods like it belonged there. When we got home, we locked the doors and windows. Something we never usually did. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, my hands still shaking, and my husband pouring us both a shot of whiskey. We drank it in silence, the burn of the alcohol doing little to calm my nerves. I kept replaying the whole thing in my head, the rustling, the creature emerging, the headlights, the flight, over and over like a broken record. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those red eyes reflecting the light. We went to bed eventually, but neither of us slept much. I lay there listening to every creak and groan of the house, my heart jumping at any little noise. My husband held me close, but I could feel how tense he was too. In the morning, we tried to act normal, but it was hard. We didn't tell anyone about it. Not our families, not our friends. Who would believe us? We hardly believed it ourselves. Over the years, I've thought about that night a lot. I've read stories online about similar things, people seeing big, hairy creatures in the woods, and it always sends a shiver down my spine. But I've never gone back to the South Pier, not even in daylight. My husband passed away a few years ago, and I never did ask him what he really thought it was. Maybe he didn't know either. All I know is that we saw something that night, something that shouldn't exist, and it left us with a fear that never really went away. Even now, when I hear a noise outside at night, I think back to that spring evening and wonder if it's still out there, hiding in the shadows, waiting. Story 10. It was a Tuesday. I remember that much. The air was thick and wet, the way it gets down here in the spring, everything smelling of damp earth and old leaves. We were putting up a hog pen for my cousin on his property off Springville Road, right where the land starts to get soft and slope down into the scrape. That's what we call the swampy bottoms there. It's not a full-on swamp, just a low, boggy area choked with cypress knees, black gum trees and thickets so dense you'd lose a dog in them. There were 4 of us, me and 3 other fellas from the area. We'd been at it since sunup, and the day was heating up, the humidity clinging to my skin like a second shirt. We were all sweating, our boots sinking a little into the soft ground with every step. The plan was simple: get the posts set, run the fencing, and be done by supper time. It was hard, familiar work, the kind where your mind can just wander. I was on the north side of the plot, closest to the tree line, where the real thick woods began. I was using a post hole digger, the kind with 2 handles you slam into the ground. I'd just pulled up a load of dark, wet clay and was shaking it loose when I got this feeling. It's hard to describe. It wasn't a sound. It was just a pressure, a feeling of being watched, the way you know when someone's standing behind you without hearing a thing. The hair on my arms stood up, and a cold trickle of sweat, different from the heat sweat, ran down my back. I stopped, my hands still on the digger handles, and just listened. The usual sounds were there, the buzz of insects, the distant call of a crow, the thud of a sledgehammer from one of the other guys driving a post in about 50 yards away. But it felt quiet, too quiet, like the woods themselves were holding their breath. I turned my head slowly, scanning the tree line. At first I didn't see anything, just the grey trunks of the water tupelos, the tangled green of the undergrowth. Then my eyes caught on something, maybe 60, 70 feet into the woods behind a big pine tree. There was something there. My first thought, my brain trying to make sense of it, was deer. We see plenty of deer, but this was wrong. It wasn't standing like a deer. It was standing upright, but it was using the tree to hide itself, peering out from behind the trunk. And its face... God, its face wasn't a deer's face. It was flatter, more human-shaped. Not human, don't get me wrong, it was all wrong for a human, but it had these round, dark eyes, and I could see them clearly even from that distance. They were fixed right on me. It had a head that sat directly on its shoulders, no real neck to speak of, and its arms, they were long. I mean, way longer than a man's arms. They hung down past its knees, and they were thick, like an ape's arms, covered in what looked like dark, matted hair, a sort of reddish-brown color. My breath just froze in my chest. I didn't move a muscle. I just stared back. It was like the world had shrunk down to just me and this thing in the woods. The sounds of my buddies working faded into a dull hum. All I could hear was the blood pounding in my ears. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might crack one. It didn't make a sound. It just stood there, half hidden, and looked at me. Its eyes weren't blinking. They were just these deep, dark pools, and I felt like they were looking right through me, into some part of me I didn't even know was there. It wasn't a mean look, not exactly. It was curious and ancient. That's the only word for it. It felt old, like the trees around it. The whole stare-down probably only lasted a few seconds, but it felt like an hour. Every detail got burned into my brain. The way the shadows fell across its face, the texture of the hair on its arms, the sheer impossible size of it. It was tall, maybe 7 feet, and lean, but it looked powerful. Then it moved. It didn't scramble or drop to all fours like a bear. It just stepped out from behind the tree. It was on 2 legs, 2 long, skinny legs that seemed too thin to hold up that upper body, and then it ran. It didn't run like a man. A man has a certain rhythm when he runs. This was different. It was a loping, fluid, powerful stride. It was fast, unbelievably fast. It moved through the trees and the thick underbrush like it wasn't even there, its long arms swinging at its sides, not used for balance, just moving with its body. It didn't make a sound. No crashing through brush, no snapping twigs. It was just a dark shape gliding between the trees, swallowed by the shadows of the swamp in a matter of seconds. I was still standing there, gripping the post-hole digger, my knuckles white. I felt cold all over, despite the heat. My mouth was dry as dust. I tried to swallow and couldn't. "George, you gonna plant that thing or just stare at it all day?" It was Bobby's voice, shouting from across the field. The sound snapped me back to reality. I blinked and looked over at the others. They were still working, oblivious. One was wrestling with a roll of fencing wire. Another was taking a drink from a thermos. Normal stuff. I let go of the digger and it fell into the hole with a soft thud. I walked over to them, my legs feeling like rubber. I must have looked as bad as I felt, because Bobby stopped what he was doing and squinted at me. "You all right, George? You look like you seen a ghost." I opened my mouth to tell him to just blurt it out, but the words wouldn't come. What was I supposed to say? I just saw a giant hairy man with ape arms run into the swamp on 2 legs. I'd have been laughed right off the property, or worse, they'd think I'd lost my mind. So I just shook my head and wiped my forehead with my sleeve. "Just the heat, I guess," I mumbled, feeling a little light-headed. I went and got a drink of water from the jug we had sitting on the tailgate of the truck. My hands were shaking so bad I spilled half of it down my shirt. I kept glancing back at the tree line. It was just trees again. Quiet, normal woods. But it didn't feel normal anymore. It felt like a mask, and behind it was something I couldn't understand. We went back to work. I tried to focus on the task, on the feel of the hammer in my hand, the sound of the nails going in. But my mind was back in those woods. Every little noise made me jump. A squirrel scrambling up a tree, a branch cracking under someone's boot. I was on edge, my nerves stretched tight like piano wire. I couldn't shake the image of that face, those eyes. The other guys noticed I was quiet, but they just figured I wasn't feeling well. We broke for lunch around noon, sitting on stacks of lumber or the tailgate, eating sandwiches my wife had packed. I couldn't eat, my stomach was in knots. I just sipped my water and stared at that tree line. "You sure you're okay, George?" one of the other men, Carl, asked. "You ain't said 2 words all morning." "I'm fine," I lied. "Just got a lot on my mind." I thought about telling them then, but as I looked at their faces, tired and dirty from honest work, the idea of telling them what I saw just seemed crazy. It would break the reality of the day. It would change everything. So I kept my mouth shut. The afternoon dragged on. The sun moved across the sky, and long shadows started to stretch out from the woods. That feeling of being watched never really went away. It was a low-grade hum of dread in the back of my skull. I found myself positioning myself so I could always keep one eye on the woods. I didn't want my back to it. Not for a second. Around 3 in the afternoon, we were almost done with the fencing. I was tying off the last section of wire, my fingers sore and bleeding in a couple of spots. That's when we heard it. It wasn't a loud sound, it was low, and it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. A kind of deep, guttural whoop. It wasn't a bird. I've heard every bird that lives in this swamp. It wasn't a fox or a bobcat. This was different. It was a sound I'd never heard before in my life. It started low, rose in pitch, and then dropped off into a series of grunts. It was vocal. It had purpose. All four of us stopped what we were doing at the exact same time. We all looked at each other, then towards the woods. "What in the hell was that?" Bobby said, his voice low. "Bear," Carl suggested, but he didn't sound convinced. We stood there listening. The sound didn't come again, but the silence that followed was even worse. It was a heavy, waiting silence. The insects had even stopped buzzing. Then from a different part of the woods, closer this time, there was a sound like a thick branch being snapped in two. Not a small twig, but a big, solid branch. Crack! It was so sharp it made us all flinch. That was it for me. The fear that had been simmering in my gut all day just boiled over. "That's it," I said, and my voice came out higher than I meant it to. "We're done for the day." The others didn't argue, not one bit. They were spooked too. We started packing up our tools, moving faster than we had all day. We weren't talking. We were just throwing things into the truck bed, our movements jerky and hurried. I kept my eyes on the woods, my heart back to hammering again. I felt like a kid again, afraid of the dark. Only the dark was right there in those trees, and it had eyes and long, skinny legs. We got everything loaded up in record time. We piled into the cab of the truck, all four of us, which was a tight squeeze. Bobby was driving. He started the engine, and the sound was loud and reassuring. He didn't even bother turning around slowly. He just threw it in reverse and backed up quick, the tires spinning a little in the soft ground, then slammed it into drive and headed down the dirt track towards Springville Road. None of us said a word until we were on the paved road, the tires humming on the asphalt. We were all looking out the windows at the woods flashing by. "You know what that was, don't you?" Carl finally said, his voice quiet. No one answered him. We all just sat there. We knew, or at least, we knew it wasn't a bear or a deer or a lost dog. We knew it was the thing I had seen, and it was still out there. Bobby dropped me off at my house, which wasn't far. I got out, mumbled a thanks, and went inside. My wife asked me how the day went. I just said, "Fine." I took a long, hot shower, trying to wash the feeling of that thing stare off my skin. It didn't work. I didn't sleep much that night. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind in the trees outside my window made me sit bolt upright in bed. I kept seeing it in my mind, over and over, the way it stood, the way it looked at me, the way it ran. The next day, I had to go back to my cousin's to drop off some extra tools. I went in the bright light of midday. I walked to the edge of the hog pen we'd built. Everything was quiet, peaceful. I made myself walk over to the tree line, to the spot where I'd seen it. My boots crunched on the leaves. I was scared, my palms sweating, but I had to look. There, in the soft, wet earth right at the edge of the woods, was a track. It was huge, longer than my boot and twice as wide. It had 5 toes, and the impression was deep, like whatever made it was heavy. It wasn't a bear track. Bears have claws, and this didn't. The shape was all wrong. It was just a long, human-like foot, but way too big. I stood there looking down at it, and that cold feeling washed over me all over again. It was real. It had been right here. I never told my cousin. I never told anyone but the guys I was with that day. We still don't talk about it. What is there to say? We went out to build a hog pen, and we came back knowing that the woods we'd grown up in, the woods we thought we knew, held something else, something that walked on 2 legs, had a face that was almost human, and arms that were all wrong, something that watched us, and then vanished back into the shadows without a sound, and that's it. That's what happened. I still don't know what it was. I just know I saw it. Story 11. It was one of those thick, heavy summer days in Barnwell County, the kind where the air feels like a warm, wet blanket the second you step outside, and the buzz of insects is so loud it almost drowns out your own thoughts. The date was June 8th, 1978. I was 12 years old. My brother, who was 10, and our friend, who was also 12, had the whole stretch of summer ahead of us and absolutely nothing to do. We'd been kicking around the house all morning, driving our mom crazy until she finally shooed us out the screen door and told us not to come back until the streetlights were on. We didn't need telling twice. Our world back then was the woods and the fields and the forgotten places at the edge of town. That day, we decided to head down to the old railroad tracks. They weren't used anymore. The rails were rusted, a deep orange-brown, and the wooden ties were soft and spongy with rot, splintering apart if you kicked them too hard. Weeds and saplings grew right up between them. It was our own private highway, cutting through a tunnel of pine trees and thick, tangled underbrush. On one side of the tracks, the land sloped down into a swamp. You could always smell it, a low, musty odor of damp earth, decay and stagnant water. It wasn't a bad smell, not really. It was just the smell of that place, a smell I'd known my whole life. We were messing around, seeing who could walk the farthest on one of the rusty rails without falling off. I was losing. The heat was making me dizzy, and the metal was almost too hot to touch with my bare feet. My brother was ahead of me, and our friend was lagging behind, poking at a rotten log with a stick. Everything was normal. Everything was boring, in the best way a summer day can be boring for a kid. And then the sound started. It wasn't loud at first. It was a high-pitched noise, so high it was almost at the edge of what I could hear. I stopped, 1 foot on the rail, 1 foot off, and tilted my head. My brother froze too. The sound got louder. It wasn't a bird. I knew every bird sound in those woods. This was different. It was a screech, but not like a hawk or an owl. It was sharper, more painful, like metal being twisted and torn apart, but mixed with something alive, something screaming. It raised the hairs on my arms and the back of my neck. It was coming from the swamp side of the tracks, down in the thickest part where the water was. "What is that?" my brother whispered. His eyes were wide. Our friend had dropped his stick and was just staring into the trees. I don't know. We stood there for a second, just listening. The screech cut off abruptly, leaving a silence that felt heavier and more threatening than the noise itself. The normal sounds of the woods, the insects, the distant birds, had all stopped. It was dead quiet. I don't know which one of us suggested we go look. Maybe it was me. It was a stupid kid kind of bravery, the kind that doesn't understand consequences. We weren't thinking about what could make a sound like that. We were just curious. It was something to do. We scrambled down the gravel embankment and into the tree line. The air changed immediately. It was cooler under the canopy, but the swamp smell was stronger here, that wet, rotten smell filling my nose. The ground was soft and sucked at our sneakers. We had to push through thorny vines and ferns that were as tall as my waist. We didn't talk. We just moved slowly, heading in the direction where the sound had come from. We probably only went 50 feet in, but it felt like a mile. The trees were so thick it was like walking through a green wall. We came to a small, slightly clearer patch, a place where a few bigger trees had fallen and left a gap in the canopy. A little sunlight filtered down, making the gnats look like swirling gold dust. And that's when we saw it. It was standing maybe 30 feet away, half hidden behind the massive, moss-covered trunk of a fallen pine. It was tall, so much taller than any man. I remember my brain just stuttering, trying to make sense of the shape. It was upright, on 2 legs, but it was all wrong. It was covered in hair, long, shaggy, dark brown hair that was almost black in the shadows. Its arms were ridiculously long, hanging down past its knees, and they were thick like tree limbs. My eyes traveled up, and that's when the real fear, the cold, solid kind, locked my feet to the ground. It had a face, a human-like face. It wasn't a bear. I'd seen bears. This was different. The face was broad with a heavy brow, but underneath that I could see dark, intelligent eyes. They weren't animal eyes. They were looking right at us. It seemed as startled as we were. It wasn't moving. It wasn't making a sound. It was just standing there, frozen, one of those long-fingered hands resting on the log. We were frozen too, the three of us, just kids and this thing, in a silent, staring standoff. Time got weird. It felt like an hour, but it was probably only 15 seconds. My heart wasn't just beating fast, it was slamming against my ribs so hard I thought it would break them. I could feel every single thump in my throat. My mouth was dry as dust. I could hear my own breathing, a ragged, shaky sound, and I could hear my brother's, a little whimpering gasp next to me. I didn't dare look away from the creature. I was terrified that if I blinked, it would move. I noticed small details because my brain was screaming, trying to record everything. The hair on its chest was matted, with bits of leaves and twigs stuck in it. The color wasn't a uniform brown. It was darker on its back and lighter on its front, like it had been sun-bleached. The musty smell of the swamp was suddenly overpowered by another smell, a strong, wild, musky odor, like a wet dog, but sharper, more pungent. It was coming from it. I could see its chest moving, rising and falling slowly. It was breathing. Its face was the worst part. It wasn't snarling or baring its teeth. It was just watching us. There was a stillness to it, a calmness that was more terrifying than any aggression could have been. It looked curious and maybe a little confused, just like we were. But in those dark eyes, there was a depth, a knowing, that made my skin crawl. This wasn't just some dumb animal. This was something that was thinking, assessing us. Then my brother made a sound. It wasn't a word, just a tiny strangled squeak in the back of his throat. That broke the spell. The creature didn't roar, it didn't charge, it just shifted its weight, a subtle movement, and its head tilted a fraction of an inch. That small motion was all it took. I don't know who started running first. I think all three of us just turned and bolted at the exact same instant. There was no run, scream. There was just a blind, panicked flight. The fear that had been holding me frozen suddenly exploded into pure adrenaline. I ran like I had never run before in my life. I crashed through the underbrush, not feeling the thorns tearing at my arms and legs. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just focused on the patch of daylight ahead where the railroad tracks were. I could hear my brother and our friend right behind me, their footsteps pounding, their breath coming in ragged, terrified sobs. The only thing in my mind was getting to the tracks, getting up the embankment, getting out of those woods. I scrambled up the gravel slope on my hands and knees, stones digging into my palms. I didn't care. I stumbled onto the rusty rails and just kept running down the center of the tracks, my legs burning, my chest on fire. I still didn't look back. I was too scared of what I might see chasing us. We ran all the way home. We didn't stop once. We burst out of the tree line at the edge of our neighborhood and kept going, past houses, past startled people watering their lawns, our sneakers slapping against the hot asphalt. We didn't stop until we slammed through our own front door, gasping and crying, our clothes torn and dirty. My mom came rushing out of the kitchen, her face white with alarm. We were all trying to talk at once, hysterical, pointing back toward the woods, our words tumbling over each other. A monster, a big man in the woods. It was huge. She tried to calm us down, thinking it was a bear, or our imaginations, or a prank that had gone wrong. She got us glasses of water, her hands shaking. We were covered in scratches, our knees were scraped raw from the gravel, and we were shaking so hard we could barely hold the glasses. The smell of the swamp, and that other, muskier smell, was still stuck in my nose. My dad came home from work later, and he and some of the neighbors, armed with shotguns and flashlights, went back to the railroad tracks. We were too scared to go with them. We sat in the living room with my mom, waiting, jumping at every little sound. They came back an hour later. They hadn't found anything. No tracks, no sign of any large animal, just the usual swamp mud and fallen leaves. One of the neighbors said he thought he smelled something kind of foul down there, but he figured it was just a dead raccoon or something. They all agreed it was probably a bear that had stood up on its hind legs, and our kid brains had blown it out of proportion. They meant well. They were trying to make us feel better. But I knew what I saw. My brother knew. Our friend knew. It wasn't a bear. Bears don't have faces like that. Bears don't stand that still. Bears don't have eyes that look right through you. We never went back to those railroad tracks again. Not that summer, not ever. Our friend's family moved away a year later, and we never really talked about it after that day. It was too big, too strange. What would we even say? But sometimes, even now, all these years later, if I catch a certain smell on the air, that mix of damp decay and something wild and musky, my heart will give a little lurch. I'll be 12 years old again, standing in that green, silent woods, staring at something that shouldn't exist, frozen in a moment of pure, undiluted terror. I saw it, I know I did, and I have no way to explain it. Story 12. It's been over 15 years now, but I still get a cold feeling in my gut when I think about it. I don't talk about it much, because honestly, who'd believe me? But I saw something out there in the woods in Shasta County that changed how I see everything. I was ranching back then, had been for a good while. It was hard work, but it was a quiet life, the kind where you know every sound your land makes at night, or you think you do. This all happened on one day. I remember it was a Tuesday because Conrad usually came by on Tuesdays to help with the far pasture fence line. The morning was normal. I was up before the sun, the air still cold enough to see my breath. I'd made a pot of coffee so strong it could probably strip paint, just the way I liked it. I was out by the main barn, greasing the hinges on the big door. The smell of that grease and the damp morning dirt. That's what I remember. Simple things. Conrad showed up around 9 in the morning. He was a good friend, had a spread a few miles over. We'd help each other out. He pulled up in his beat-up old truck, the one that was more rust than paint. And he got out, but he didn't look right. Normally, he'd amble over, all easy smiles. That day, he just stood by his truck door for a second, like he was gathering himself. His face was pale, and his eyes had a look I'd only ever seen once before, when he'd gotten his hand caught in a winch. It was that kind of shaken, wide-eyed stare. I wiped my hands on my jeans. "You all right, Conrad? You look like you've seen a ghost." He walked over, his steps slow. He ran a hand through his hair, which was already a mess. "I didn't sleep last night," he said, and his voice was rough, like he'd been swallowing gravel. Not a wink. I waited. "You learn to do that with folks out here. They'll talk when they're ready." He leaned against the barn wall, and I could see his hands were trembling just a little. He kept clenching them into fists to try and stop it. "You remember I got that buck yesterday? Nice 8-pointer down in the creek draw on my property." I nodded. "Yeah, you were chuffed about that." "I was. I field-dressed him, hauled him back, and hung him from the big oak behind my cabin. You know the one, solid limb. Hung him high, figured he'd be safe there to cool overnight." He paused, and his eyes got that far-away look like he was seeing it all over again. The dogs. That was the first thing. After dark, my dogs started up, but it wasn't their normal bark. You know a dog's bark. There's the hey, a rabbit bark, the someone's coming up the drive bark. This was different. It was a low growl at first, a real mean rumbling sound from deep in their chests. Then it turned into this frantic, high-pitched yelping. They were backed up against the front door of the cabin, hair standing up all along their spines, just losing their minds. I'd never seen them like that. They were terrified. I took a sip of my coffee. It had gone lukewarm. The morning seemed to have gotten quieter, like the birds had stopped singing. "I figured it was a bear," Conrad went on. "A big one, maybe, to get them so worked up." I grabbed my rifle, not to shoot anything, just to make some noise, scare it off. I cracked the door open. The dogs tried to bolt back inside, scrambling between my legs. It was pitch black out there. No moon. I flicked on the porch light, but it's a weak bulb. Only throws light a few feet. I could see the shape of the oak tree, and I could see the deer was still there, a dark shape swinging just a little. He swallowed hard, and I could see his Adam's apple bob. And then I heard it. He looked right at me then, and the fear in his eyes was so raw, it made the hair on my own arms stand up. It was a scream, man. A scream like nothing I have ever heard in my life. It wasn't a coyote, it wasn't a mountain lion, it wasn't a bear. It was like a human scream, but deeper and full of so much rage. It was a roar and a scream all mixed into one. And it was so loud, it felt like it was vibrating right through my chest. It came from right there, from the darkness under that oak tree. The sound of it, it froze me solid. My fingers went numb on the rifle stock. I just stood there paralyzed. He was breathing a little faster now, reliving it. The scream stopped, and for a second it was dead quiet. Not even the bugs were making a sound. And then I heard this sound, this tearing sound. It was thick and wet, and it was followed by this metallic ping, ping, ping that I knew was my barbed wire fence snapping. What the hell was it? I asked, my own voice a whisper. I don't know, he said, his voice cracking. I shined my flashlight out there, my hand shaking so bad the beam was jumping all over the place, and I saw it. Just for a second. It was huge. It was standing on two legs, and it was massive across the shoulders. It was dark, covered in hair, but not like a bear's fur. This looked coarse, like a boar's bristles. It had the deer carcass slung over one shoulder like it was nothing but a sack of feathers. And then it turned its head. Conrad's face went slack with remembered terror. It looked right at me. The light from my flashlight caught its eyes. They weren't like an animal's eyes. They weren't reflecting light like a deer or a cat. They were just dark. But I could feel it looking at me. I could feel its gaze. It was intelligent. It wasn't just some dumb beast surprised by a light. It saw me. It knew I was there. And in that look, I didn't see curiosity. I didn't see fear. I saw a cold, flat assessment and a strength, the sheer raw power of the thing. It had just ripped my 5-strand barbed wire fence apart like it was a spider web. He took a deep, shuddering breath, and then it was gone. It just turned and vanished into the trees, taking the deer with it. It moved so fast for something so big. 1 second it was there, the next it was just darkness and silence. We both stood there for a minute, not saying anything. The sun was higher now, warming the air, but I felt cold. I didn't sleep, Conrad repeated. I sat in my kitchen with the rifle on the table and all the lights on until the sun came up. This morning, I went out to look. The deer is gone. Not a scrap left. And the fence, Tom, you gotta come see the fence. So I went with him. We didn't talk much on the drive over. His place felt different the moment we pulled up. The air was still, his dogs were inside, and they didn't even bark when we arrived. They just whined from behind the door. He led me around back to the big oak. The rope he'd used to hang the deer was still there, snapped clean through, the end frayed. It wasn't cut, it was torn. We walked past the tree, towards the property line where his fence was, and then I saw it. This wasn't a bear. I've seen what bears do. They might push through a fence, bend a post, maybe break a wire. This was different. This was violence. 3 of the fence posts, thick treated lumber that had been in the ground for years, were snapped off about 2 feet from the base. Not leaned over, snapped. The broken ends were splintered and white, like someone had taken a giant sledgehammer to them. The barbed wire, the heavy gauge stuff, wasn't just broken, it was torn. Some strands were pulled clean out of the staples on the posts that were still standing, curled back like twisted metal ribbons. Other strands were just gone, yanked right out into the forest. But the thing that made my blood run cold was on one of the top strands of wire that was still attached to a post, wrapped tight around the barbs, pulled taut, were thick, coarse hairs. They were black, but with a reddish tinge in the sunlight. They weren't bear fur. Bear fur is finer, softer. These were thick, like stiff horsehair, but darker. Each one was as thick as a pencil lead. And stuck to the base of one of the hairs was a tiny piece of skin, dark and leathery. I reached out, but I didn't touch it. My hand just stopped in the air. I could smell the sap from the broken wood and the dry, dusty smell of the dirt. I could see where the thing had walked away. Not tracks, really. The ground was too hard and rocky, but a path of crushed undergrowth leading off into the dense pines. That's when the full weight of Conrad's story hit me. This wasn't his imagination. This wasn't a tall tale. The sheer physical power needed to do that, to snap those posts, to tear that wire. It was impossible. No bear on earth has that kind of strength. A bear might claw a post, but it doesn't snap a 6-inch thick post in half. It doesn't treat high-tensile barbed wire like it's sewing thread. I looked from the destroyed fence to the coarse hairs, and then into the dark line of the trees where the thing had disappeared. The woods I'd known my whole life, the woods I'd hunted in, camped in, worked in. They suddenly felt alien. They felt deep and old and full of secrets I didn't want to know. Conrad was just staring at the hairs on the fence. "What was it, Tom?" he whispered. I didn't have an answer. I still don't. We stood there for a long time, not saying a word, just listening to the absolute silence of the forest around us. It was a silence that felt heavy and watchful. I helped him patch the fence that day. We worked fast, not talking much, both of us jumping at every little sound from the trees. We used new posts, pounded them in deep, strung new wire. But it felt pointless, like putting a band-aid on a dam that's already burst. I drove home that evening as the sun was going down. The long shadows from the trees stretched across the road like grasping fingers. For the first time in my life, I locked my door that night. I looked out my kitchen window into the blackness, and I didn't see my familiar land. I saw a vast, dark space where something that shouldn't exist had looked at my friend with a cold, knowing intelligence, and then demonstrated a power that defied any logic I knew. I never went back into those deep woods alone again. I sold the ranch a couple of years later and moved. I told people it was for work, for family reasons, but the real reason is that I could never shake the feeling that I was being watched from the tree line. I never saw it myself, and I'm grateful for that. But seeing what it did, hearing the pure terror in Conrad's voice, and looking at those coarse black and red hairs stuck on that torn fence wire, that was enough. More than enough. Sometimes the knowing is worse than the seeing, and I know with a certainty that sits like a stone in my stomach that something is out there in those old woods, something that doesn't belong in any world I understand. Story 13. I was 9 years old. We were camping at a place called Macon Gulch, way out in Idaho, about 20 miles north of a little town called Fairfield. The area was basically a ghost town, an old mining spot that had been abandoned for decades. My dad was into that kind of thing. History, old ruins, getting us out into the middle of nowhere. It was just my dad, my stepmom, my older brother and me. My infant sister was there too, but she was just a baby, strapped to my dad's back in one of those carrier things. That morning, we'd spent a few hours exploring these old, weathered cabins. They were cool and creepy at the same time. The wood was all grey and splintered, roofs caved in, and you could still see bits of old furniture inside. A broken chair, a rusted bed frame. The silence out there was heavy, you know. Not a peaceful quiet, but the kind that feels like it's pressing in on you. The only sounds were our footsteps crunching on gravel and dry pine needles, and the wind whistling through gaps in the wood. My brother and I messed around poking at things with sticks, but even we got quiet after a while. The place just had a feel to it, like we weren't entirely welcome. We had our dog with us, a Chesapeake Bay retriever named Sadie. She was a big, strong dog, solid brown, with this thick, oily coat that always smelled a bit like a wet blanket. She wasn't a scaredy cat. Nothing ever spooked her. She'd chase off raccoons, stand her ground against other dogs twice her size. She was just a solid, dependable presence, always padding along near us, her tail wagging slowly. It was getting late in the afternoon, the sun starting to dip behind the mountains. casting long, stretched-out shadows through the pine trees. We were heading back to our campsite on this overgrown trail. It wasn't a real trail, more like a game path that was barely there, just a slightly clearer line through the thick brush and ferns. The order we walked in is burned into my brain. My stepmom was in front, setting a brisk pace. Then my brother, then me and my dad brought up the rear with my baby sister on his back. Sadie was roaming around nearby, sniffing at everything, her nose to the ground. We'd been walking for maybe 10-15 minutes when things started to feel off. It's hard to describe, but the woods got quiet, like really quiet. A few minutes before, you could hear birds, the scuttling of squirrels in the leaves, the normal sounds of the forest. Now it was just us, our footsteps, our breathing. That was it. It was like someone had thrown a soundproof blanket over everything. My dad noticed it first. I heard him stop behind me. I turned to look, and his face was serious, his head cocked to the side, listening. He had this look he got when he was concentrating hard, his eyebrows pulled together. He whistled, sharp and short, for Sadie. She usually came bounding right back, but this time she just stopped what she was doing and looked toward a thick patch of brush to our left. Her whole body went rigid. Her ears pricked up, and her tail, which had been wagging, dropped and went still. "Sadie, come," my dad said, his voice low but firm. She didn't come. She let out a low growl, a sound I'd never heard from her before. It wasn't her usual, "I see a squirrel" growl. This was deeper, a rumble that came from her chest. The hair on her back stood straight up, all along her spine. "What is it, girl?" my stepmom asked. She'd stopped too now. We were all just standing there on this narrow path, looking at the dog, looking at the wall of green where she was staring. Then something moved in the brush. It wasn't a small animal. You could hear it. A heavy snap of a branch, the sound of something big pushing its way through the ferns and salal bushes. It wasn't trying to be quiet. Sadie lost it. She erupted into this frenzy of barking, the loud, sharp, "I'm going to kill you" kind of bark she used for bears. And then she charged. She just launched herself off the path and into the thicket, barking her head off. We all stood frozen, watching the bushes shake and rustle where she disappeared. The barking stopped maybe 3 seconds later. It didn't trail off. It just cut off. In its place was a single high-pitched yelp. It was a sound of pure, absolute terror. I'd never heard a dog make a sound like that. It was a scream, really. A short, sharp scream of pain and fear, all mixed together. Then the bushes exploded and Sadie came bolting out. She wasn't running back to us. She was just running away. She blew right past the path, her eyes wide and white-rimmed, her body low to the ground, moving faster than I'd ever seen her move. She didn't even look at us. She was just gone, a brown streak disappearing into the trees on the other side of the trail. The silence that followed was worse than before. It was thick and heavy and terrifying. My heart was hammering in my chest so hard I could feel it in my throat. My dad whispered, "Stay close," and his voice was tight. He unsnapped the carrier strap on his chest, holding my sister tighter against his back with one hand. That's when I looked up. I don't know why I looked up. I just did. There was a ridge, maybe 50, 60 yards away, rising up above the brush. And on that ridge, standing between two big pine trees, was something. It was tall. So tall, its shoulders were massive, hunched forward, and its arms were long, hanging down past its knees. It was covered in hair, but it wasn't like a bear's fur. This was thick, shaggy, and the color was this weird red-orange, like a rusty red, catching the last of the afternoon sun. It wasn't standing straight up, but it wasn't on all fours either. It was in this crouch like a person squatting, but it was way too big to be a person, and it was looking right at me. Its face, I don't like thinking about its face. It was dark, like leather, and the hair around it was shorter. I couldn't make out clear features, no eyes or a nose, just dark patches, but I knew. I knew it was looking directly at me. I felt it. A cold jolt went through my whole body, like I'd been dropped into ice water. My stomach just dropped away. It felt hollow. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I just stood there, locked in place, staring back at this thing. It felt like an hour, but it was probably only a second or two. Then my dad grabbed my arm, hard. "Run!" he hissed. "Now!" That broke the spell. I started running. I didn't look back. I just ran. My stepmom was already moving, pulling my brother along. I could hear my dad right behind me, his boots pounding on the dirt. My sister starting to whimper. I was crying. I know I was. Big gasping sobs that made it hard to breathe, but my legs kept pumping. I tripped on a root and my knee slammed into the ground, but I scrambled right back up, not even feeling the pain. The only thing in my head was that image of the thing on the ridge and the need to get away. The run back to camp was a blur of panic and terror. Every shadow was that thing. Every rustle of leaves was it coming for us. I kept expecting to feel a huge hand grab me from behind. We finally burst into the clearing where our tents were set up, all of us gasping for air. My stepmom immediately ran to the car, fumbling for the keys, and there was Sadie. She was under the picnic table, pressed as far back into the shadows as she could get. She was shaking, not just a little tremble, but her whole body was vibrating with fear. When I got closer, I saw she was panting, her tongue hanging out, and there was drool dripping from her jowls. She wouldn't come out. She just stared past us, back toward the woods, her eyes still wide with fear. My dad didn't waste a second. He was pale, his hands shaking as he put my sister down in the playpen we'd set up. He went to the truck and started pulling out our gear. He got a big spool of fishing line and a bunch of empty soda cans from our recycling bag. "Help me with this," he said to my brother and me. His voice was all business, which somehow made me even more scared. He was scared and he was trying not to show it. We strung the fishing line in a big circle around our campsite, about 20 feet out from the tents and the fire pit. We tied empty pop cans to the line every few feet. It was a makeshift alarm system. If anything or anyone crossed the line, the cans would rattle and we'd hear it. It was fully dark by the time we finished. We didn't build a fire. We just sat in the tent, all of us together, listening. The only light was from a single battery-powered lantern, casting long, dancing shadows on the tent walls. My sister was asleep, thankfully. My brother and I were huddled in our sleeping bags, but I don't think either of us even thought about sleeping. Sadie was still under the picnic table outside. She'd refused to come into the tent with us. We just sat there for what felt like forever, listening to the normal night sounds that had slowly returned. Crickets, an owl somewhere far off. It almost started to feel normal again. Maybe we'd overreacted. Maybe it was just a bear, a weird-colored bear. My dad had his arm around my stepmom, and they were talking in hushed tones I couldn't make out. Then the cans rattled. It wasn't a loud clatter. It was a soft, tinny shake, like someone had gently brushed against the line. It came from the far side of the camp, away from the trail we'd come from. We all went dead silent. My dad slowly got to his knees and peered out through the mesh window of the tent. I held my breath. The crickets had stopped again. A minute passed. Nothing. Then, from the opposite side of the camp, the cans rattled again. Shake. A little louder this time. Something was moving. Something was walking around us, just outside the ring of fishing line. My dad turned back to us, his face a mask of pure fear in the dim lantern light. He didn't say a word. He just shook his head and put a finger to his lips. We heard it take another step. It wasn't a quiet step. It was a heavy, soft thump on the forest floor, like someone dropping a sack of potatoes. Then another. It was big. Whatever it was really, really big. It kept walking, a slow, deliberate pace. We could follow its progress just by listening to the soft thump, thump. And then, a few seconds later, the gentle, chilling rattle of the cans as it crossed our tripwire. It was making a full circle around our campsite. It knew we were here. It was checking us out, containing us. I started crying again, silent tears that just rolled down my face. I buried my face in my sleeping bag to muffle the sound. My brother was gripping my arm so tight it hurt. My stepmom had her hand over her mouth, her eyes huge. The walking stopped. The woods were silent again. For a long time, maybe 5 minutes, there was nothing. Just us, holding our breath in a dark tent, waiting. Then, from right outside the tent, not 10 feet away, we heard it breathe. It was a deep, wet, rattling inhalation, like someone with a bad chest cold taking a huge breath. It held it for a second, and then let it out in a long, low sigh that wasn't human. It wasn't an animal sound I'd ever heard. It was just wrong. That was it. My dad moved faster than I'd ever seen anyone move. We're leaving. Now. Grab the baby, grab your shoes, get in the truck. There was no discussion. We erupted from the tent. In the pitch dark, we scrambled. My stepmom grabbed my sister. My brother and I just grabbed our sleeping bags and ran for the truck in our socks. My dad didn't even try to pack the tents. He just yanked the stakes out of the ground, crumpled the tents up, and threw them, poles and all, into the back of the pickup. Sadie, hearing the commotion, finally bolted from under the table and leapt into the truck bed. My dad jumped into the driver's seat, fumbling with the keys. The engine roared to life. He didn't turn on the headlights. He just threw it in reverse and spun us around on the dirt, the tires spraying gravel. Then he slammed it into drive and we shot forward, bouncing wildly down the rough dirt road away from Macon Gulch. He didn't turn the headlights on until we were a mile down the road. Nobody said a word the whole drive. We just sat there shivering, wrapped in our sleeping bags. I looked back once, but there was only darkness behind us. We never went back. We never even talked about it much as a family. It was just this thing that happened, this shared horror that we all silently agreed to lock away. But I never forgot it. I never forgot the heavy silence, Sadie's terrified yelp, or the tall, red-orange thing on the ridge, looking right at me with a presence that felt ancient and wild and deeply, deeply wrong. And I never forgot the sound of it breathing right outside our tent, circling us in the dark. I still sometimes hear that wet, rattling breath in my dreams. I don't know what it was. I just know that it was real and it was there, and we were not supposed to see it. Story 14. I was behind the wheel of our old Ford pickup, a beat-up thing that rattled if you went over 50, but it got us where we needed to go. My wife was in the passenger seat, dozing off with her head against the window. The radio was playing some staticky country station, but I turned it down low because the noise was starting to grate on my nerves. The headlights cut through the darkness, but not far enough, just enough to see the asphalt ahead and the dense trees crowding the sides of the road. Out there, away from the towns, the night gets real dark. No streetlights or anything, just the moon when it peeks through the clouds. We were on this back road, one of those 2-lane highways that cuts through swampland and pine forests. I'd driven it 100 times before, but never this late. Something about the silence got to me. No cars passed us for miles, and the only sounds were the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle from the woods. I remember gripping the steering wheel a little tighter, my knuckles white, even though I wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the way the shadows moved, or just the creepiness of being alone out there. My wife stirred beside me, rubbing her eyes. "How much longer?" she mumbled, her voice sleepy. "Not too far," I said, trying to sound calm. "Maybe another 20 minutes. I glanced at her, saw the fatigue on her face, and felt a pang of guilt for keeping us out so late. We'd been married for 3 years then, and she was always the sensible one, the one who'd say, "Let's head back before it gets dark." But that night, I'd talked her into staying, and now here we were. That's when I saw it. Up ahead, about 25 yards away, something darted across the road. At first, I thought it was a deer. We get a lot of them around there, especially at night. But this was different. It was smaller, maybe 5 feet tall, and it moved in a way that made my stomach drop. It wasn't running like a deer, all graceful and swift. It was more of a lope, kind of awkward but fast, like it was half walking, half skipping, and it stopped right in the middle of the road, turning to look at us. I slammed on the brakes, not hard, but enough to make the tires squeal a little. The truck shuddered to a stop, and my wife jolted awake. "What is it?" she said, her voice sharp with alarm. I didn't answer right away. I was just staring, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. The thing was standing there, frozen in our headlights. It was covered in dark brown hair, but not shaggy or matted like an animal's. It looked silky, almost like human hair, but thicker. The light caught it, and I could see it was wet, maybe from the swamp humidity, and it glistened. Its body was proportional, like a kid's, maybe 10 or 11 years old, but it wasn't human. The arms were a bit longer than they should be, and the legs were bent in a way that made it seem like it was ready to spring. But the face, God, the face is what stuck with me. It didn't have features I could make out clearly, but I saw eyes. They were dark, reflective like an animal's, and they were fixed on us. Not scared, not aggressive, just curious, or maybe assessing us. It stood there for what felt like forever, but it was probably only a couple of seconds. Then, in one fluid motion, it leaped off the road and disappeared into the swamp on the other side. It didn't run, it jumped, like it was weightless, and it vanished into the thick undergrowth without a sound. My wife gasped, and I felt her hand clamp down on my arm. "Did you see that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I nodded, my throat too dry to speak. I just sat there, hands still on the wheel, staring at the spot where it had been. The road was empty again, but the image was burned into my mind. The way it moved. It wasn't like a man or a monkey. I've seen monkeys at the zoo, and they're jerky, frantic. This was smooth, almost graceful, but unnatural, like it didn't belong in this world. The swamp beside us was dark and murky, with cypress trees rising out of the water, their knees poking up like bony fingers. The air smelled of decay and wet earth, and I could hear the faint croaking of frogs, but nothing else. No rustling, no sign that anything had been there. It was as if the thing had melted into the shadows. "What was it?" my wife said, her voice rising a notch. She was leaning forward, peering into the darkness, like she expected it to come back. "I don't know," I managed to say. My heart was still racing, and I could feel sweat trickling down my back. I rolled up my window, suddenly feeling exposed. The night felt heavier, more oppressive. Maybe it was a bear cub or something, but even as I said it, I knew it wasn't. Bears don't move like that, and they don't have that kind of hair, and they sure as hell don't stop and stare you down in the middle of the road. This was something else. I put the truck in drive and eased forward slowly, my eyes glued to the spot where it had vanished. The headlights swept over the swamp, but all I could see was tangled vines and dark water. Nothing moved. I drove a little farther, then pulled over to the side of the road, my hands shaking. I needed a minute to collect myself. My wife was breathing fast, her knuckles white where she gripped the dashboard. "It looked like a child," she said, her voice small, but it wasn't. It was too wrong. I knew exactly what she meant. It had the size and proportions of a kid, but everything else was off. The hair, the way it moved, the silence of it. There was no sound when it jumped, no splash, no crackling of branches, just silence. We sat there for what felt like an hour, but it was probably only 5 minutes. The night seemed to close in around us. I kept expecting to see it again, maybe lurking in the trees, but there was nothing, just the swamp, dark and still. Finally, I started driving again, this time going slower, my eyes scanning the sides of the road. My wife was quiet, and I could tell she was as spooked as I was. Every shadow seemed to move, every rustle in the bushes made me jump. The rest of the drive home was tense, both of us on edge, not saying much. When we got home, we didn't even unpack the truck. We just went inside, locked the door, and sat at the kitchen table staring at each other. The house felt too quiet, too safe, and it made the memory of what we'd seen even more vivid. "Do you think it was one of those Bigfoot things?" my wife asked after a while. Her voice was low, like she was afraid someone might hear. I shrugged. I'd heard stories, of course, everyone around here has, tales of big, hairy creatures in the woods, but they're always described as huge, 7 or 8 feet tall. This thing was small, child-sized. It didn't fit. I don't know, I said again. But whatever it wasn't natural. We tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a sick animal or someone playing a prank. But deep down, we both knew. The way it looked at us, with those dark, intelligent eyes, it was real, and it was something we couldn't explain. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it standing there in the headlights, staring back at me. I kept thinking about the variety of these creatures. If they're real, maybe there are different kinds, sizes we don't know about. The thought sent chills down my spine. The next day, we didn't talk about it much. We went about our lives, but something had changed. I found myself avoiding that road, taking longer routes home. My wife started closing the curtains early, like she was afraid of what might be outside. Even now, years later, I can still picture it clearly. The dark brown hair, the way it moved, the silence. I've never seen anything like it since, and I hope I never do. But that one night in August of 1995, driving home late with my wife, we saw something that shouldn't exist, and it left us with a fear that never really went away. I've told a few people about it over the years, but most just laugh it off or say it was probably a bear. But I know what we saw, and sometimes, when I'm driving late at night, I catch myself scanning the sides of the road, half expecting to see those dark eyes staring back at me from the shadows. Story 15. Okay, so this happened back in early February of 1999. I was up in Blue Mountain in Berks County, Pennsylvania, specifically in this state game land area called 110.me, and a friend, we'll just call him my friend since names don't matter much here, were out grouse hunting. It was one of those days where the cold just seeps into your bones, you know. The snow was deep, maybe knee-high in places, and it had this icy crust on top that made every step a gamble. You'd think you were stepping on solid ground, and then your boot would punch through, and you'd sink in with this crunching sound that echoed in the quiet. Walking was a chore. It felt like wading through thick mud, but colder, way colder. We'd been out since morning, and the sky was this flat, grey colour, like it couldn't decide if it wanted to snow more or just stay miserable. The trees were mostly bare, except for some pines here and there, and everything was so still. You could hear your own breathing, the rustle of your coat, that kind of thing. We'd split up a bit to cover more ground, but we were within shouting distance, or so we thought. The plan was to meet up if one of us got a bird. I remember I'd just shot a grouse. The sound of the shotgun blast was huge in that silence, like it ripped through the air and left everything even quieter afterward. The bird dropped, and I went over to pick it up. My hands were shaking from the cold, or maybe the adrenaline, I don't know. I called out to my friend, letting him know I'd got one. He shouted back, but his voice sounded distant, muffled by the snow and the trees. He said he'd come over, but it took him what felt like forever, 15, maybe 20 minutes, to actually reach me. I could hear him crashing through the snow, cursing under his breath as he slipped and stumbled. When he finally got there, he was breathing hard, his face red from the effort. We talked for a minute just about the hunt, and then he decided to head back to where he'd been. He said he'd try his luck another spot, and he started making his way back, his footsteps fading into the woods. So there I was, alone. The silence settled back in, but it felt different now, heavier. I was just standing there, holding the dead grouse, feeling the weight of it in my hand. The cold was starting to bite through my layers, and I shifted from foot to foot to keep the circulation going. That's when I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, movement on the ridge above me. At first, I thought it was a deer or maybe a bear. But no, this was different. It was a dark figure, stark against the white snow. It was moving along the ridge, and it was fast. I mean, ridiculously fast. I've seen animals run before, but this was something else. It covered what had to be 100 yards in what felt like seconds, just sprinting along the ridge. Then it stopped, dead still, and I could feel my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't even have time to process it before it turned and charged straight uphill toward me. Now let me be clear, that hill was steep, and the snow was that icy crust I mentioned. I'd been struggling to walk on flat ground, and here this thing was, coming up that slope like it was nothing. It didn't slip, didn't stumble, just powered through. I watched it cover another 150 yards uphill in what had to be 1 to 3 minutes. No human could do that. No animal I know either. The speed was unreal, and the way it moved was wrong. It was upright like a person, but bulkier, and it had this fluid, powerful gait that made my skin crawl. I was frozen, just staring. My brain was screaming at me to move, but I couldn't. It stopped about 50 feet away from me, and that's when the real terror hit. I could see it clearly now. It was tall, maybe 7 feet or more, and covered in long, matted black hair that hung down like a curtain. Its face was hidden under that hair, but I could feel it looking at me, staring. And it wasn't breathing hard, not even a little. After that sprint through snow and ice that should have been impossible, it was just standing there, calm as anything. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the grouse. I fumbled for my shotgun, raising it slowly. I've hunted my whole life. I know how to handle a gun, but in that moment, I felt like a kid playing with a toy. I pointed it at the thing, my finger on the trigger, but it didn't flinch, didn't show any fear at all. It just stood there staring for what felt like a minute or two. Time stretched out, and all I could hear was the blood pounding in my ears. The cold didn't matter anymore. I was sweating under my clothes, my heart thumping so hard I thought it might burst. I kept expecting it to charge again, to come at me, but it didn't. After what felt like an eternity, it slowly turned away, like it had decided I wasn't worth the trouble. It started walking off, not running, just a steady, deliberate pace, and then it glanced back over its shoulder, just once, and I swear, even though I couldn't see its face, I felt like it was mocking me, like it knew how scared I was, and it didn't care. As soon as it was out of sight, I collapsed. My legs just gave out, and I sat there in the snow, trembling. I don't know how long I stayed like that, but eventually I heard my friend calling out again. He'd made his way back, and when he saw me, he asked what was wrong. I tried to tell him, but my voice was shaky, and the words came out all jumbled. I said something about a big, dark thing that charged at me, and how it moved too fast to be real. He didn't believe me. He laughed it off, said I must have seen a bear or something, that the cold was getting to me. But I insisted, and I pointed to where it had been. The snow was all torn up from its movement, and I showed him the tracks. Huge, deep impressions that didn't look like any animal I'd ever seen. He still wasn't convinced, so he decided to try running on the ice himself, to prove how impossible it was. He took a few steps, then broke into a jog, and almost immediately his feet went out from under him. He fell hard, cursing as he hit the ground. When he got up, his face was pale. He looked at me, and then at the tracks, and he didn't say anything for a long time. He just knew. We packed up and got out of there as fast as we could. The walk back to the truck felt like it took years. Every sound in the woods made me jump, a branch snapping, the wind rustling the trees. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see that dark figure again. My friend was quiet the whole way, and when we finally reached the truck, he just said, "I believe you now." But that didn't make me feel any better. I've replayed that day in my head 1,000 times since then. The way it moved, the way it stared. It wasn't just some animal. It was intelligent, I'm sure of it. It came to investigate the gunshots, and it wasn't afraid of me or my shotgun. That's what sticks with me the most. I've never felt so small, so utterly vulnerable. I've told a few people about it over the years, but most just shrug it off or make jokes about Bigfoot. But I know what I saw, and I know it was real. To this day, I can't explain it. I've never gone back to that part of the woods, and I doubt I ever will. Sometimes when I'm out hunting elsewhere, I'll get this feeling like I'm being watched, and it all comes rushing back. The fear, the cold, that dark figure charging through the snow. It's been over 20 years, but it feels like yesterday. I still wake up some nights, heart racing from dreams about it. And I always wonder, what was it? And why did it let me go? Story 16. Okay, so I've been sitting on this for a while, but I need to get it out. I've never really talked about it online before, but after reading some other stories here, I figured why not? This happened about 2 years ago, back when my daughter was 7. We'd always loved camping together, just the two of us, and I wanted to give her a taste of the real wilderness, away from all the noise and crowds. So I picked this spot in Marquette County, Michigan, that I'd heard about from a buddy. He said it was remote, peaceful, right by a stream, and hardly anyone went there. Sounded perfect. We drove out there on a Friday afternoon in late September. The leaves were starting to turn, all oranges and reds, and the air had that crisp feel that makes you want to breathe deep. My daughter was buzzing with excitement in the passenger seat, asking a million questions about what animals we might see. I told her maybe deer, squirrels, the usual stuff. I didn't mention anything else, because why would I? We found the spot after a bumpy ride down a dirt road that felt like it went on forever. It was exactly as described, a small clearing near a stream, surrounded by tall pines and oaks. The water babbled softly, and the sun was dipping low, casting long shadows. It felt like our own little paradise. We set up the tent together, one of those easy pop-up kinds, and I made sure to stake it down good because the forecast said it might get windy. My daughter helped gather some dry twigs for a fire later, her little hands full of them, and she kept giggling about how we were like explorers. I started a small fire as the sky darkened, and we roasted hot dogs on sticks, then marshmallows for s'mores. She was having the time of her life, and so was I. Everything felt normal, you know, just a dad and his kid enjoying nature. But as it got fully dark, that's when things started to change. At first, it was just the usual night sounds, owls hooting, crickets chirping, the stream gurgling. Then, maybe an hour after we'd zipped ourselves into the tent, I heard this low thumping noise. It wasn't loud at first, just a dull thud every now and then, like something heavy was walking around out there. I brushed it off, thinking it might be a deer or maybe a bear in the distance. Bears aren't uncommon up there, but they usually keep their distance. My daughter was already asleep, curled up in her sleeping bag, so I didn't want to wake her. The thumping got closer, though. It started to sound like footsteps, but not like any animal I'd ever heard. They were heavy, deliberate, like whatever it was had weight to it. Then pine cones started hitting the tent. Not just falling, they were being thrown hard. One smacked against the side of the tent with a sharp crack, and my daughter stirred. I whispered, "It's okay, sweetie, probably just the wind." But there was no wind. The air was dead still, and I could feel my heart starting to pound. She woke up fully when another pine cone hit, this one right near her head. Her eyes were wide, and she clutched my arm. "Daddy, what's that?" she asked, her voice shaky. I told her it was probably a squirrel or something playing around, but I knew it wasn't. Squirrels don't throw pine cones with that much force. The thumping kept going, circling the tent. I could hear it moving around us, sometimes close, sometimes a bit farther, but always there. It felt like it was pacing, like it was sizing us up. I grabbed my flashlight, one of those heavy-duty ones with a strong beam, and held it tight. My hands were sweating, and I could feel the cold seeping through the tent floor. The temperature had dropped, and I was shivering, but not just from the cold. Every time a thud came, the ground seemed to vibrate a little. My daughter buried her face in my side, and I kept whispering to her, "We're safe in here. Nothing's going to hurt us." But I didn't believe it. I was terrified, and I think she could feel it because she started crying softly. The circling went on for what felt like hours. I lost track of time, but it must have been most of the night. The sounds would ease up for a few minutes, then start again, always moving. At one point, I heard something snap a branch nearby, a thick one from the sound of it. That's when my mind flashed back to something I hadn't thought about in years. When I was in my 20s, I was hiking near Lake Superior, not far from here, and I saw something big and hairy moving through the trees. It was tall, way taller than a man, and it moved with this weird grace. I never told anyone because who would believe me? I convinced myself it was a bear, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. Bears don't walk upright like that for long, and this thing was massive. Seeing it had stuck with me, and now, hearing those sounds, it all came rushing back. The thuds got louder and more frequent, like whatever it was getting agitated. Then came the worst part. A series of heavy crashes, like branches were being broken deliberately. Not small twigs, big, thick branches that sounded like they were being snapped in half. Each crack made me jump, and my daughter whimpered, holding onto me tighter. I could hear it moving closer to the tent, and I swear I felt the ground shake under us. I pointed the flashlight at the tent wall, but I was too scared to unzip it and look out. What if it was right there? What if it saw us? I kept the beam aimed, my finger on the switch, ready to flash it if I had to. My mouth was dry, and I could taste the fear like metal on my tongue. I whispered to my daughter to stay quiet, that we just had to wait for morning. She nodded, her little body trembling against mine. The sounds kept coming. Thumps, cracks, and now this low grunting noise that I hadn't noticed before. It was deep, guttural, like something from a nightmare. I've heard bears grunt, but this was different, more intelligent somehow, like it was communicating or warning us. I remember thinking, we're intruding here. This is its territory and we shouldn't be here. It felt like we'd stumbled into someone's home uninvited, and they weren't happy about it. The air felt thick with tension, and every noise made my skin crawl. I could smell the pine and damp earth, but also this musky odor that I couldn't place. It was strong, like wet dog mixed with something rotten. I don't know if it was my imagination or real, but it added to the dread. Time dragged on, and I kept checking my watch, but it was too dark to see. I just waited for the first hint of light. My legs were cramping from sitting in one position, and my back ached, but I didn't dare move much. My daughter eventually fell asleep again, exhausted from the fear, but I stayed wide awake, listening to every sound. The thumping would sometimes stop for a while, then start up again, like it was testing us. Once, I heard what sounded like something dragging along the outside of the tent, a scratching noise that made my hair stand on end. I held my breath, expecting the fabric to tear, but it didn't. When the sky finally started to lighten, from black to gray, the sounds faded away. It happened gradually. The thumps got quieter, the breaking branches stopped, and the grunting ceased. By the time the sun was peeking over the trees, it was silent again, except for the stream and the morning birds. I waited a few more minutes, just to be sure, then slowly unzipped the tent flap. The first thing I saw was the ground around us. It was messed up, not just from us setting up camp, but there were deep footprints in the soft soil. They were huge, bigger than my own boots, and shaped weird, like a human foot, but wider and longer. I felt a chill run down my spine. Then I looked at the trees nearby. Branches were broken off, some as thick as my arm, snapped cleanly and scattered around. One pine tree had what looked like claw marks on the bark, high up, way higher than any bear could reach. I woke my daughter gently, and she looked out with me. Her eyes got big, but she didn't say much. I think she was too scared to process it. We packed up our stuff as fast as we could. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely fold the tent, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see something in the trees. The whole time, I felt like we were being watched. We threw everything in the car, didn't even bother with breakfast, and drove out of there without looking back. The ride home was quiet. My daughter stared out the window, and I kept replaying the night in my head. I felt drained, like I'd run a marathon, and my nerves were shot. When we got home, I put our gear away and tried to act normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I knew without a doubt that it was a Bigfoot. Not some myth or story, but a real thing that had been out there, asserting its presence. We'd been in its space, and it made sure we knew it. I've never gone back to that spot, and I don't think I ever will. My daughter doesn't like to talk about it, and I don't push her. Sometimes when I'm alone at night, I still hear those thumps in my head, and I get this cold sweat. I can't explain it to anyone who wasn't there, and I don't expect them to believe me. But I know what I experienced, and it's stuck with me ever since. Story 17. I was 17 that summer, working for Old Man Henderson on his farm out in Blue Mountain. It was Berks County, Pennsylvania, real backwoods country. The kind of place where the trees go on forever, and your nearest neighbor is a mile down a dirt road. The job was simple, just manual labor. Me and this other guy, we were just throwing bales of hay onto a wagon. It was hard work, the kind that makes your back ache and your hands raw. But the pay was decent for a kid, and it beat sitting around all summer. This particular day was a Tuesday. I remember that because we'd just started the week, and the weekend felt a million years away. It was hot. The kind of humid, sticky heat that makes your t-shirt cling to your skin, and the air feel thick to breathe. The sky was a pale, hazy blue. No clouds. We were out in this big field, the one that slopes down toward a thick line of trees with a dirt track running between them. We'd been at it for a couple of hours, the tractor puttering away in a low idle, the smell of diesel and cut grass hanging in the air. We were about 2/3 of the way through loading the wagon. I remember that specifically because I was counting the bales in my head, trying to figure out how many more we had to go before we could take a break and get some water. I was up on the wagon, stacking, and my co-worker was on the ground, forking the bales up to me. We weren't talking much, just working in that rhythm you get into where you don't need words. I paused for a second to wipe the sweat off my forehead with my arm, and I just happened to glance across the dirt road. That's when I saw it. At the edge of the trees, maybe 50, 60 yards away, there was this figure. It was just standing there. My brain didn't jump to monster or anything like that. My first thought was, who the hell is that? It was so out of place. There were no houses around, no trails that anyone used. It was just woods. But the more I looked, the less sense it made. This thing was tall, I mean really tall. It had to be 8 feet easy. And it was broad, like a football player, but way bigger. It was just standing upright, completely still. Its arms were hanging down at its sides, loose, like how a person would stand if they were just waiting for something. It wasn't leaning on a tree, it wasn't fidgeting. It was like a statue. The confusion was the first thing that hit me. It wasn't fear, not yet. It was just this complete mental disconnect. Nothing about it fit. The size was wrong. The place was wrong. The way it was just planted there was wrong. It was covered in dark hair, like a really shaggy dog, but it was standing on 2 legs like a man. The sun was behind us, so it was lit up pretty clear. There were no shadows playing tricks. This was in broad daylight. I couldn't speak. I just made this grunting noise and nudged my co-worker with my boot. He was bent over, getting ready to lift another bale. He looked up at me, annoyed, and I just pointed. I didn't say a word. He followed my finger, and I saw his body go rigid. His face just emptied, all the color drained out of it. He dropped the hay hook he was holding. It hit the ground with a dull thud, but neither of us flinched. We were both just frozen, staring. The tractor was still idling, that low, chugging sound filling the silence. It was the only sound. There were no birds chirping. I remember that now, thinking back. The woods had gone completely quiet. It was just us, the tractor, and this thing standing at the tree line. We were up on the wagon, so we had a good view. We just stared. It felt like forever, but it was probably only 10 or 15 seconds. It was so long that the initial confusion started to curdle into something else. A cold knot was forming in my stomach. My heart wasn't racing yet. It was like it had forgotten how to beat properly. My skin started to feel tight and cold, even in the heat. Then it moved. It didn't startle or jump. It just turned its upper body, real slow and smooth, like it was on a swivel. It didn't look at us. It just turned to face the woods, and then it started to walk. It walked on two legs, long, deliberate strides. It didn't hunch over. It didn't drop to all fours. It walked like a person, but its legs were too long, and the steps were too big, covering ground in a way that didn't seem right. The movement was powerful, effortless. It just stepped into the tree line and was gone. The whole thing, from when it turned to when it disappeared into the shadows of the woods, took maybe 3 seconds. That's when the terror hit. It was a physical thing, a wave of ice water that slammed into me. My heart suddenly remembered its job and started hammering against my ribs so hard I could feel it in my throat. My hands started to shake. I looked at my coworker, and his eyes were wide, his mouth hanging open. He looked as terrified as I felt. We didn't say anything for a full minute. We just stood there, listening to the tractor. The normal sound of it now seemed obscenely loud. The woods were still silent. "Did you see that?" I finally whispered. My voice was hoarse. He just nodded, his head moving in a quick, jerky motion. He still couldn't speak. "What was it?" I asked, even though I knew he didn't have an answer. He shook his head, finally finding his voice. It was a strained, thin sound. I don't know what that was." We both looked back at the spot where it had been. There was nothing there, just trees and shadows. But the image of it was burned into my eyes, the sheer size of it, the way it stood, the way it walked. It wasn't a bear. Bears don't stand straight up like that and just hang their arms. They don't walk like that. It wasn't a person in a costume. No costume is that good, and who the hell would be out here in the middle of nowhere, standing perfectly still at the edge of the woods for no reason? The logic of it all just fell apart. The only thing that was left was this primal, gut-level fear. We knew, both of us, without having to say it, that what we had seen wasn't human, and it wasn't any animal we knew of. The rest of the workday was a blur. We finished loading the wagon in a frantic, silent rush. We weren't careful about how we stacked the bales. We just threw them up there, our heads on a swivel, constantly scanning the tree line. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made us jump. The woods, which had always just been woods, now felt like they were watching us. The air felt heavy, oppressive. We drove the tractor and wagon back to the barn, and the whole time, neither of us spoke. We just kept glancing at each other, seeing our own fear reflected back. We unloaded the hay as fast as we could, the silence between us louder than any conversation. When we were done, we finally talked, standing by our beat-up old cars. "We gotta tell someone," my coworker said. He was trying to sound normal, but his voice was shaky. "Yeah," I said, "we should." But I already knew, even then, how it would go. I went home and told my parents over dinner. I tried to be calm about it, but the fear was still right there under my skin. I described it exactly as I saw it. The height, the build, the way it stood, the way it walked. My dad chewed his food and nodded. "Probably a shadow," he said. "The light plays tricks out in those fields. Or maybe it was a big black bear standing up. They can look tall when they do that." "It wasn't a bear," I said, my voice rising a little. "It walked on two legs. It didn't hunch over. It was walking." "Fatigue," my mom said gently. "You boys were working hard in the heat. Your mind can see things. They weren't being mean. They were trying to be rational. They were giving me the easy, comfortable explanations. But I knew with a certainty that felt like a rock in my gut that they were wrong. My coworker called me later that night. He'd gotten the same reaction from his family. "They think we're crazy," he said, and he sounded defeated. We told a few friends. They either laughed or looked at us with this weird, pitying expression. "Bigfoot?" one of them said, smirking. "Come on, man." After a while, we just stopped talking about it. What was the point? But we never forgot. Every time I saw my co-worker after that, there was this look that passed between us. A silent acknowledgement. We knew. That day is stuck in my head, clear as a photograph. The heat, the smell of hay and diesel, the deafening silence after the birds stopped, the way my co-worker's face went slack with shock, the cold dread that started in my stomach and spread through my whole body, and that thing, that impossibly tall, broad-shouldered figure, standing like it was part of the forest, then moving with a grace that was all wrong for its size. It wasn't a story. It wasn't a hallucination. It was there. We both saw it, and to this day I have no idea what it was, only that it was real, and that for a few terrifying seconds it was just standing there, watching us, before it turned and walked away into the trees like it owned them. Story 18, Ashkiya. Okay, I'm just going to type this out. I've been putting it off for a while, but I need to get it out there, see if anyone else has heard something like this. I don't know what I'm hoping for, maybe just to not feel so alone in being completely freaked out by it. My hands are still a little shaky thinking about it, so bear with me. This happened back in October. My husband and I had rented this cabin in North Georgia for a long weekend. It was supposed to be a quiet getaway, you know. No kids, no work emails, just the two of us and a whole lot of trees. We'd gotten there that afternoon. The cabin was nice, kind of rustic, but with a decent kitchen and a big stone fireplace. It was set back from a dirt road, with woods pressing in on all sides. The kind of place where the silence is so complete, it almost has a weight to it. We'd made dinner, had a couple of beers by the fire, and just relaxed. It was a perfectly normal, nice evening. We went to bed around 10:30. The bedroom was on the second floor, with a big window that looked out into the blackness of the forest. I remember lying there, just on the edge of sleep, listening to the absolute nothing. No cars, no people, just the occasional creak of the cabin settling. Then it started. It was just after 11 o'clock. I know because I looked at the digital clock on the bedside table. The red numbers burning into the dark. The sound was like nothing I've ever heard before or since. It wasn't a howl, not really. It was a scream, a high-pitched, shrill, horrible scream. It was close, not right outside the window, but close enough that there was no mistaking. It was in the woods right behind the cabin. I'd say maybe 200 feet away, max. The sound cut through the silence like a physical thing, and every single hair on my arms and the back of my neck stood straight up. I froze. I was lying on my side, and I just went rigid. My husband, he's a heavy sleeper, but he jerked awake next to me. "What the hell was that?" he whispered, his voice thick with sleep and sudden alarm. I couldn't answer. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might crack one. We both just lay there, not moving, barely breathing, listening. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the sound itself. It was a waiting silence. Then it came again, exactly the same. That drawn-out, piercing shriek. It didn't sound animal, but it didn't sound human either. It was somewhere in between, and it was full of, I don't know, rage, pain? It's hard to describe. It was just pure, undiluted wrongness. It was too long to be a coyote. I've heard coyotes. This was different, higher, more shrill, and it held that peak of intensity for what felt like an impossibly long time. From somewhere off in the distance, maybe from a farm a half-mile away or something, dogs started going crazy. It wasn't just one or two, it was a whole chorus of them, barking and howling in a total frenzy. They'd heard it too, and they were just as terrified as I was. My husband sat up in bed. He's ex-military, did a tour overseas, and he's an avid hunter. He knows woods and he knows sounds. He looked at me in the dim light, and his face was dead serious. "That's not a bobcat," he said, his voice low and steady, but I could hear the tension underneath. That's not anything I've ever heard. The scream came a third time. Every time it hit, it felt like an ice-cold needle was being driven into my spine. I pulled the comforter up to my chin, my fingers clutching the fabric so tight my knuckles ached. I was shaking, not just a little tremble, but proper whole-body shakes. I felt cold, a deep internal cold that had nothing to do with the temperature in the room. "Should we look?" I managed to whisper, my throat so tight the words barely came out. He was already shaking his head. "No, absolutely not. We stay put." He got out of bed, but he didn't go near the window. He moved quietly to the bedroom door and listened. I just stayed curled up in a ball, listening to the frantic barking of the dogs and waiting for that scream to tear through the night again. It did. A fourth time. This one seemed to go on even longer. It was so loud, so clear. It wasn't fading into the distance. Whatever it was staying put. It was just standing out there in the dark, screaming its head off. I started to feel nauseous, a sick rolling feeling in my gut. This wasn't curiosity anymore. This was a deep, primal fear, the kind that tells you are not at the top of the food chain, the kind that tells you there's something outside your flimsy wooden walls that you do not want to see. My husband came back to the bed, but didn't lie down. He sat on the edge, his back ramrod straight, his head cocked, listening. He was in what I call his situational awareness mode. Every sense was dialed to 11. The fifth scream was the worst. It felt closer, or maybe it was just my fear amplifying everything. But it sounded angrier, more guttural, like it was ripping its way out of whatever throat was producing it. The dogs were absolutely losing their minds. I could hear one of them, its bark becoming a panicked, high-pitched yelp. After that fifth one, the silence came back. But this time, it was different. The dogs were still barking, but their bark started to change. The frenzy died down, replaced by a few scattered, uncertain woofs, and then nothing. They just stopped, all of them at once. It was as if someone had thrown a switch. The sudden quiet was deafening and 1,000 times more terrifying than the noise had been. Why had they stopped? What had made them stop? We waited. 1 minute. 2. The clock ticked over to 11:04. The cabin was dead silent. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. My husband slowly got up and walked to the window. He didn't open the blinds. He just put his face close to the edge where the slats met the frame, trying to see out into the impenetrable black. "See anything?" I breathed, my voice barely audible. "Nothing. Pitch black," he murmured back. He stood there for a long time, just watching. I kept expecting another scream, but it never came. The absence of it was almost as bad. Where did it go? What was it doing now? After what felt like an hour, but was probably only 10 minutes, my husband came back to bed. He didn't lie down. He just sat there, propped against the headboard, his pistol he'd brought for the trip now on the nightstand next to him, within easy reach. He's not a paranoid guy, but he's practical. And in that moment, having that gun nearby was the only thing that made me feel even slightly better. "Go to sleep," he said softly. "I'll keep watch." I knew there was no chance I was sleeping. I lay there staring at the dark ceiling, my mind racing. I went through every animal I could think of. A fox? Their scream is creepy, but this was louder, deeper in tone, despite its high pitch, more powerful. A mountain lion? They're not really in Georgia, and their sounds are different, more like a woman screaming, but not with that raw, shredded quality. An owl? No way. This was a large animal. You could feel the power behind it, the lung capacity. It was big. My husband was right. It wasn't a coyote, wasn't a bobcat. It was something else. Every tiny sound from the woods made me flinch. A branch snapping, the rustle of leaves in a slight breeze. I was hyper-aware of everything. The weight of the blankets felt suffocating, but I was too scared to move. I just kept replaying that first scream in my head, the way it had instantly, violently ripped me from the edge of sleep into a state of pure terror. I must have drifted off at some point because the next thing I knew, grey morning light was filtering through the blinds. My husband was still sitting up awake, his eyes red-rimmed. He looked exhausted. "Anything?" I asked. He just shook his head. Quiet. After the dogs stopped, it was completely quiet. We got up. The cabin felt different in the daylight, but the memory of the night was like a stain on it. We were both quiet, moving around each other as we made coffee. We didn't talk about it. What was there to say? After we'd had some coffee, my husband looked at me. "I'm going to take a look around. Outside." A knot tightened in my stomach. "Do you have to?" "Yeah," he said. "I do." He took his pistol and slipped it into the waistband of his jeans at the small of his back. I followed him to the back door. He unlocked it and stepped out onto the small deck. The morning was cool and misty, the woods smelling of damp earth and pine. It looked peaceful, innocent. It was a lie. He walked down the 3 wooden steps and onto the grass, his eyes scanning the tree line. I stayed on the deck, my arms wrapped around myself, watching him. He moved slowly, deliberately, his head on a swivel. He walked along the edge of the woods, maybe 20-30 feet from the tree line, just looking. Then he stopped. He was looking down at something on the ground, near the base of a huge old pine tree. He crouched down, his back to me. He stayed like that for a long time. "What is it?" I called out, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet morning. He didn't answer right away. He stood up slowly and turned around. His face was pale. He walked back towards me, his steps measured. When he got to the bottom of the deck steps, he looked up at me. "There's a track," he said. His voice was flat, controlled. "A track. Like a deer." He shook his head. "No, not a deer, not a bear. Come look." I didn't want to. I really didn't want to. But I made myself walk down the steps and follow him across the damp grass to the spot near the pine tree. He pointed at the ground. There, pressed deep into the soft, muddy soil, was a single footprint. It was huge. I'm not just saying that. It was easily 16, maybe 18 inches long. It was vaguely human-shaped, with 5 discernible toes, but it was wide, really wide. The impression was deep, like whatever made it was immensely heavy. The mud had been pushed up around the edges. It was fresh. It hadn't been there when we arrived the day before. We'd walked around the whole property. I just stared at it. My brain was trying to process it, to fit it into a box labeled known animal, and it was failing completely. There was no box for this. My husband crouched down again, not touching it, just examining it. "Look at the stride," he said, pointing from that print to another one, a few feet away, that I hadn't even noticed. The distance between them was enormous. Whatever this is, it's tall. Really tall. He stood up and looked into the woods, in the direction the tracks were heading. They went straight into the thick undergrowth and disappeared. He looked back at me, and I saw it in his eyes, the same confusion, the same deep-seated unease that I was feeling. This man who has been in firefights, who has tracked deer and elk for years, was unsettled, seriously unsettled. We didn't have a tape measure. We didn't have plaster to make a cast. We just stood there looking at this thing in the mud, this impossible proof that the screams we heard had come from something real, something physical, something that left a footprint bigger than my husband's boot. We packed up and left the cabin that same morning, 2 days early. We made some excuse to the rental company, didn't mention the screams or the track. What would we have said? We just got in the car and drove home, mostly in silence. I still think about it all the time. I lie awake sometimes at night and hear that first scream in my memory, and the chill comes right back. I've listened to every sound file online of every known animal in North America. Nothing matches. Nothing even comes close. That footprint is what gets me the most, the sheer size of it, the weight it implied, the fact that it was just there. We didn't see anything, we just heard it, and then we found its mark, and then it was gone. I don't know what was in those woods with us that night. I don't have a name for it. I don't want to have a name for it. All I know is that it was real. It was close, and it was screaming into the dark for a reason I will never ever understand. And I can't explain the feeling that we were being watched the whole next morning, right up until we drove away. Story 19. It was one of those days that starts out so normal, you don't even think to remember it, until it gets burned into your brain forever. I was in my second year of college in Ashland, Wisconsin. This was a few years back now. My friend, let's just call him my friend. We'd been buddies since high school, and we both shared a love for the outdoors that most of the other guys in our dorm thought was kind of weird. It was bow season, late October. The air had that crisp bite to it that means winter isn't far off, but the sun was still strong enough to warm your jacket if you stood in it. We'd decided to head out to this spot he knew about, a real remote patch of land his uncle owned. It wasn't a managed forest or anything, just a big wild chunk of land covered in thick woods, swamps and more briar patches than you could believe. Getting through some of it meant you were going to get scratched up. No two ways about it. We parked his beat-up old truck on a logging road that was more two ruts than a road, shouldered our gear, and started hiking in before the sun was even properly up. The plan was simple. He'd still hunt along the ground near a creek bottom, and I'd found this perfect tree stand I'd hung a few weeks earlier on the edge of a ridge, overlooking a thicket so dense it was like a green wall. I remember the climb up. It was one of those climbing stands, the kind with the cables you have to pull up with you. It's not a quiet process. The metal parts clink, your boots scrape on the bark, you're breathing heavy. But once you're up there, maybe 25 feet off the ground and you get settled, everything just goes quiet. That's the part I've always loved. The world shrinks to the circle of trees you can see, and you just exist. You hear every little rustle, every squirrel chattering, every distant bird. You become a part of the woods. That morning was perfect for it. The sun was starting to filter through the pine and oak trees, making long, lazy beams of light that hit the forest floor. I could see my breath in little puffs. I'd been up there for a couple of hours just watching. My mind was wandering, thinking about a paper I had due, about what was for lunch later, the usual stuff. I remember shifting my weight on the stand, the subtle creak of the metal under my feet. I remember the feel of the bow in my hand, the cold, textured grip of the composite. I remember the smell, that damp, earthy smell of decaying leaves and pine needles. It's a smell I usually find comforting. The first thing that changed was the sound, or more precisely, the lack of it. It wasn't an instant silence, but a draining away. The squirrels that had been fussing nearby just stopped. The bird song from the thicket below me cut out. It was like someone had thrown a switch. The woods didn't just get quiet, they got heavy. The air felt thicker, harder to breathe. I remember feeling a prickle on the back of my neck, that primitive little alarm bell we all have, but mostly ignore. I figured maybe a coyote was moving through, or maybe a person. I tightened my grip on my bow and scanned the thicket, trying to peer into the shadows. Then it started. It didn't begin with a sound, but with a feeling. A deep, rhythmic thumping that I felt more than heard, a vibration coming up through the tree. It was slow at first, and I thought stupidly that it was my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, but it wasn't in my ears. It was in the tree. Thump, thump, thump. It was getting closer. Then the sound came. It wasn't a growl, it wasn't a roar. It was this low, guttural rumbling noise, so deep it was almost a subsonic hum you felt in your teeth. It sounded wet, like there was phlegm or something caught in its throat, and it was getting louder, fast. I was frozen. I'm not talking about scared. I'm talking about a full system lockdown. My brain was screaming at my body to move, to knock an arrow, to do something, but every muscle was locked solid. I was just a pair of eyes staring down into that green wall. That's when the thrashing started. Something big, I mean really big, hit the edge of the thicket. It didn't walk into it, it barreled through it. I saw saplings, young trees maybe 2 inches thick, just snap. Not bend and break, but snap like dry twigs. The noise was unbelievable, a crashing, smashing, ripping sound as it tore through the briars and undergrowth. The vegetation was shaking so violently it was like watching water boil. Leaves and bits of broken branches were flying everywhere, and then it screamed. God, that sound. I'll hear it in my dreams until the day I die. It was a high-pitched shriek, but it wasn't short. It was sustained, like it had infinite breath. It was piercing, the kind of sound that feels like a needle going straight into your eardrum. But layered underneath that high shriek was that same low, guttural rumble, creating this horrible, discordant harmony that was just wrong. It wasn't an animal sound I recognized. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a bobcat. It wasn't a dying rabbit. It was something else. Something that sounded intelligent and enraged at the same time. I was still frozen in that tree, my knuckles white on my bow. I was pressing myself back against the trunk so hard I could feel every knot and ridge in the bark through my jacket. My heart wasn't just pounding, it was slamming against my ribs, a frantic panic drumbeat. I could feel a cold sweat break out all over my body, a clammy feeling that had nothing to do with the morning chill. I remember my jaw was clenched so tight my teeth ached, I couldn't see it. That was the worst part. I could see the path of destruction it was carving, a tunnel of shaking, splintering plants moving parallel to the base of my ridge. I could hear this thing, maybe 30, 40 yards away, just obliterating everything in its path. I could smell it too, a new smell cut through the earthy scent of the forest. It was musky, thick like wet dog, but mixed with something foul, like rotten meat and old garbage. It was so strong it made my eyes water. Down below, I saw my friend. He'd been working his way along the creek and had frozen in his tracks too. He was closer to the action than I was, maybe only 20 yards from the edge of the thicket. I saw his face. It was pure, undiluted terror. His eyes were wide, his mouth was hanging open. He was looking right at the source of the noise. The thing changed direction then. It stopped moving parallel and turned, starting to come up the ridge, towards me. The thumping vibration in the tree got stronger. Thump, thump, thump. Each one was a massive, weighty impact. I could hear heavy, crunching footsteps now, separate from the sound of it smashing through the brush. They were slow, deliberate. That's when my friend saw it. I know because his head tracked it. His eyes following something moving, his expression went from terror to something else, something like disbelief, like his brain was refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. The thing let out another one of those horrific shrieks, this one so loud and so close that I physically flinched, my head ducking down involuntarily. The sound felt like it was right at the base of my tree. The smell was overwhelming now, a physical presence in the air, that rotten, musky stench clogging my nostrils. I finally broke. The fear just overloaded my system, and the only command that got through was star run star. I didn't think, I didn't plan my descent, I just moved. I fumbled my bow, hooking it onto the stand's haul line with shaking, clumsy fingers. I didn't care about the noise anymore. I scrambled down that tree so fast, I'm surprised I didn't fall. I scraped my shins on the bark, tore my sleeve on a branch, but I didn't feel any of it. The only thing I felt was the desperate, primal need to be away from there. I hit the ground and my legs almost buckled. I looked over at my friend. He was already backing away, his own bow held uselessly in one hand, his other hand held out like he was warding something off. His face was pale as a sheet. We didn't say a word, not one. We just looked at each other, and in that one look, we communicated everything. Get to the truck. Now. We turned and ran. We didn't jog. We didn't move quietly. We ran like our lives depended on it, crashing through the woods, not caring about the noise, not caring about the briars tearing at our clothes and skin. Branches whipped my face. I stumbled over a log and went down hard on one knee, pain shooting up my leg, but I scrambled right back up and kept running. I didn't look back. I was too afraid of what I might see following us. The run back to the truck felt like it took forever, but it was probably only 10 minutes of pure, adrenalized panic. We burst out of the tree line onto the logging road, gasping for air. My lungs were on fire. My friend fumbled for his keys, his hands shaking so badly he dropped them in the dirt. He scooped them up, unlocked the truck, and we piled in, slamming the doors shut. He turned the key and the engine roared to life. He slammed it into gear and we tore off down that rutted road, the truck bouncing and skidding, gravel pinging off the undercarriage. We didn't speak for the first 5 minutes. We just drove, both of us breathing in ragged, shaky breaths. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling uncontrollably. I had deep bleeding scratches all over my arms from the briars I hadn't even felt. Finally, once we hit the paved county road, he slowed down a little. He looked over at me, his eyes still wide. "You okay?" he asked, his voice hoarse. I just nodded, not trusting my own voice. I swallowed, my throat dry as dust. "Did you see it?" I managed to croak out. He stared straight ahead at the road for a long time. "Yeah," he said finally. "I saw it." What was it?" He shook his head slowly, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. It was big. Really big. It came out of the thicket for a second, into a little clearing. It was on 2 legs. It was ape-like, but not an ape. It was all covered in dark, matted hair. It was huge, man, shoulders like a damn grizzly bear. And it looked right at me. He paused, swallowing hard. Its eyes. They weren't like an animal's eyes. They were intelligent and pissed, really, really pissed. We drove the rest of the way back to campus in silence. We never went back to that spot. We never even talked about it much after that day. It was too big, too strange, too frightening. What do you even say? We were 2 college kids who went bow hunting and ran into something in the woods that doesn't have a name, something that shouldn't exist, something that moved through the trees like a force of nature, something that screamed a challenge that still echoes in my head. I still have my bow. I still go hunting sometimes, but I never go into woods that thick, and I never, ever go alone. And every time I'm out there in that quiet, I listen for that silence, the heavy one, and I remember the thumping in the tree, the smell of rot and musk, and the sound of something screaming in the Wisconsin wilderness that nobody can explain.